Clara Whitmore pressed her trembling hand flat against the carriage window, swallowing her tears before a single one could fall. She had been a wife for less than an hour, and already the man beside her had turned to stone. "Never speak to me unless I speak to you first," Nathaniel Carter said, cold as December frost. She had married a fortune. She had married a stranger who despised her, and she had no notion that the secret she carried would one day bring this proud man to his knees. If you love a story of dignity and redemption, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments what town you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The chapel bell rang 11 times, and on the 11th, Clara Whitmore became the wife of the coldest man in Virginia. She stood beneath the wooden arch her own father had carved 20 years earlier, back when the Whitmore name still meant something in that dusty summer town. The dress she wore was ivory that had gone soft with age, mended at the hem, with stitches so fine you'd have to kneel to find them. She had sat up 2 nights repairing it herself by a single tallow candle, because there was no money left for a new one. There was no money left for anything. Beside her stood Nathaniel Carter. He did not look at her, not once during the whole of the vows. He looked straight ahead at the preacher, jaw set like a man enduring a tooth being pulled. And when the old parson asked him to take this woman, Nathaniel said, "I will," in a voice so flat, it made the front pews shift and murmur. The whole town had come to watch, not out of love, out of hunger. They came to see the richest landowner between the James River and the Blue Ridge marry the ruined daughter of a broken farmer, and they whispered behind their fans and their hymnals the entire time. Bought her plain and simple. Whitmore's girl ain't got a penny to her name. Reckon he needed a wife the way a man needs a fence to keep folks off his business. Clara heard every word. She had spent her whole life learning to hear cruelty without letting it show on her face, so she kept her chin level and her eyes forward. And when the parson said, "You may kiss your bride," and Nathaniel Carter turned, looked at her for the first time, and did not kiss her, only gave a small, stiff nod, and turned back. The town gasped as one. Clara did not gasp. She had expected nothing, and she had received exactly that. "Well," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "I reckon that's the warmest welcome I'll get today." Nathaniel's eyes cut to her. For half a heartbeat, something flickered there. Surprise, maybe, that the mouse he'd purchased had teeth. Then it was gone. Buried under that cold gray stillness he wore like a coat. "Come," he said. "The carriage is waiting." They rode in silence for the better part of a mile before he spoke. And when he did, his words came out measured and cruel, each one placed like a fence post, driven into hard ground. "Mrs. Carter," he said the name as though it tasted of medicine. "I'll say this once so we understand each other, and then I'll not say it again." Clara folded her hands in her lap and waited. "This marriage is an arrangement, nothing more. Your father owed debts he could not pay, and I settled them. In return, I required a respectable wife to quiet the tongues of this county and secure my family's standing. That is the whole of it. That is all it will ever be. I understood the terms when I signed them," Clara said. "You needn't repeat them," he went on as if she hadn't spoken. "You'll have a fine room, good clothes, servants to see to your needs. You'll want for nothing so long as you keep to your side of the house and your place in this county." He turned his face to the window. "Do not expect my affection. Do not expect my company. And do not." His voice dropped, hard and final. "Do not speak to me unless I speak to you first. I keep to myself. I have my reasons." Clara studied the side of his face. He was a handsome man, she'd give him that. 35 years old, dark hair going iron at the temples, a jaw a sculptor might have chiseled and then thought better of it was so severe. But there was a grief in him worn so deep it had gone hard, the way a wound goes to scar and stops hurting only because it stops feeling anything at all. "May I ask you one question?" Clara said, "before I hush for good." His jaw tightened. "One. Why me?" She kept her voice even. "You could have bought any wife in this state. Widows with land, merchants' daughters with dowries, women who'd have thanked God on their knees for a Carter ring. Why buy the poorest girl in the county?" For a long moment he said nothing. The wheels ground over the road. Somewhere a whip-poor-will called through the July heat. Because, Nathaniel said at last, the poor ones are grateful, and the grateful ones don't ask for love. Clara turned and looked out her own window then, and she did not let him see her face. Then it's a pity, Mr. Carter, she murmured, that you've married the one poor girl in Virginia who was never taught to be grateful for scraps. She heard him shift. She did not look to see whether he was angry. She had decided somewhere back at that wooden arch that she would not spend her life flinching. She had lost her home, her name, her father's good standing, and every comfort she'd ever known. She would not lose herself, too. Nathaniel Carter did not answer her, but when the carriage rocked around the next bend, and her shoulders swayed toward his, he did not pull away as quick as she expected. He noticed that, and he hated that he noticed. Carter Manor sat at the end of a 2-mile lane lined with oaks, a great pale house with more windows than a family could ever need, and fewer lights burning than a home should have. When the carriage stopped, a woman came down the steps, narrow, gray, 60 if she was a day, with a ring of keys at her waist, and a face that had learned long ago to give nothing away. Mrs. Abbott, Nathaniel said, stepping down. This is my wife. Show her to the east rooms. See that she has what she needs. He did not offer Clara his hand. He walked past the housekeeper and into the house, and a moment later, a door somewhere deep in the place shut, with a sound like a coffin lid. Clara stood at the bottom of the steps in her mended dress, holding a single carpet bag that contained the whole of her worldly possessions, and watched her husband disappear into his own home without a backward glance. Mrs. Abbott looked at her a long moment. Well, the old woman said, you'll be wanting supper, I expect. I'd want a great many things, Mrs. Abbott. Clara climbed the steps and met the housekeeper's flat gray eyes with her own. Supper's the smallest of them, but I'll take it, and I'll thank you kindly, and I'll try not to be a burden to a soul under this roof. Something shifted in Mrs. Abbott's face. Not warmth, not yet, but the weary respect one careful woman gives another. She said. This way then. The east rooms were fine. Clara would give the house that. A 4-poster bed with a coverlet of blue silk, a washstand with a porcelain basin painted with roses, a window seat that looked out over gardens no one had tended in years, gone wild and half to seed. She set her carpet bag on the coverlet and did not unpack it. She sat on the edge of the bed instead, folded her hands, and let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since morning. She would not cry. She had promised herself that. But her father's face came to her anyway, the way it had looked 3 days before the wedding, when he'd taken her hands in his and wept and told her he was sorry. He was so sorry. He'd failed her. He'd failed her dead mother. He'd failed everyone. And Clara had held him and told him, no, Papa. No, you did not fail me. We lost the land, but we did not lose each other. And this marriage, this arrangement, it will set things right, and I am not afraid. She had lied to him. She was afraid. She was terribly afraid. But she was also, underneath the fear, something her husband had not counted on when he bought a grateful bride. She was furious, not at her father, who was a good man, broken by bad luck and worse men. She was furious at a world that let a farmer lose everything he'd built, while men like Nathaniel Carter sat in great pale houses and settled debts the way other men settled a bar tab, then warned their purchased brides to keep quiet and be glad of it. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Abbott with a tray. Supper, the housekeeper said. Master takes his in his study. He'll not join you. Not tonight. Not any night, I'd wager. She set the tray on the little table by the window. Cold ham, bread, a wedge of cheese, a glass of cider. You'll get used to the quiet. Will I? Clara rose. Mrs. Abbott, may I ask you something? And you may tell me it's not my place. The old woman waited. How long has this house been dying? Mrs. Abbott went very still. I beg your pardon. You heard me right. Clara moved to the window, looked out at the strangled gardens, the fields beyond going gray-gold in the last of the light. I grew up on land, Mrs. Abbott. I know what a working place sounds like. The dogs, the men calling in the stock, the ring of a hammer at the forge. I've been here 2 hours, and I've heard none of it. I saw fields on the Ryden that ought to be waist-high in July, and they're barely to a man's knee. I saw fences down. I saw a barn roof half fallen and nobody mending it. She turned. This isn't a rich man's estate. This is a rich man's grave, with a rich man walking around in it. So I'll ask again, how long? For a long moment, Mrs. Abbott said nothing. Then she pulled the door quietly closed, so no sound would carry down the hall, and lowered her voice. 5 years, she said, since Miss Eleanor died. Clara sat back down slowly. Who is Eleanor? Mrs. Abbott's mouth thinned. Miss Eleanor Vance. Masters intended before you. They were to be married in the spring of 1811. She was the old woman searched for the word. She was sunlight, that girl. This house was alive then. 50 men on the land. Suppers with 40 at the table. Music. Master used to laugh. She said the word laugh, the way you'd describe a country you'd once visited and could never return to. Then Miss Eleanor took sick. Fever. They said gone inside a fortnight. And him? She shook her head. Something went out of him that spring and it never came back on. He let the men go one by one. Stopped the suppers. Stopped the music. Stopped near everything but riding out at dawn. And coming home at dark. And sitting alone in that study with a lamp and a bottle. She looked at Clara. He's not a cruel man by nature, Mrs. Carter. He was a warm one once. Grief it froze him solid. And a man frozen 5 years forgets he was ever anything else. Clara looked at her supper, and found she had no appetite for it. There's more, though, she said quietly. Isn't there? You said fever. They said, you didn't say fever. Mrs. Abbott's eyes flicked to the door. That's all I'll say tonight, the old woman murmured. Some things in this house you don't say out loud, not even in a whisper, not even to a wife. She moved to go, then paused at the door with her hand on the latch. But I'll tell you this much, girl. Seeing as you've got more spine than I gave you credit for, you keep those eyes of yours open. You already see more in 2 hours than most folks see in 2 years. She opened the door. Just be careful what you see. In this county, seeing too much is how a person catches the same fever Miss Eleanor caught. And she was gone. And Clara sat alone in the fine blue room, her supper cold, her mind racing, and the whole shape of the house she'd married into, shifting into something far darker than a loveless bargain. Clara Whitmore did not sleep that first night. She lay in the four-poster and listened to the house, and the house told her everything Nathaniel Carter would not. She heard, far off, a single lamplit door open and close. She heard boots on wood, a restless pacing, back and forth, back and forth. The sound of a man who could not find solace. As dawn approached, she heard the front door open, and from her window, she watched her husband ride out alone into the pre-dawn gray. He rode like a man unable to bear stillness. She did not return to bed. She dressed simply in the second of the 2 dresses she owned, and went downstairs to the kitchen. She found more than just a kitchen. She found a household steeped in fear. There was Delia, the cook, a large black woman with cautious eyes, who fell silent the moment Clara entered, waiting to gauge her new mistress. There was Amos, the stable boy, perhaps 14, rail-thin, who snatched off his hat and stared at his feet. 2 field hands, their morning coffee at the back step, set down their cups, rose, and avoided her gaze. Each one stood, as if bracing for a blow. Clara looked at them, a tight, hot sensation constricting her chest. She recognized that posture. She'd seen it on her father's face during the lean years, before ruin had made men small and wary, afraid that a wrong glance at the wrong moment could cost them their livelihood. Please, she said, her voice softer than she intended. Sit down, all of you. Finish your coffee. No one moved. Delia, Clara said, is there coffee for me too? I've been up since 4 and could drink a river. The cook blinked. You want coffee in the kitchen with whoever's sitting in it. Clara pulled out a chair at the rough kitchen table and sat down, her plain dress making her look like a farmer's daughter, which was precisely what she was. I'll tell you all something, and then I'll not make a speech of it, because I detest speeches. I wasn't born to a house like this. I was born on 100 acres of tobacco land 2 counties over, and I mucked stalls and shucked corn and buried my mother when I was 9. and helped my father run that farm until the day cruel men took it from us. So I don't know how a fine lady is meant to act, and I don't much care to learn. What I know is farm folk, and I know when farm folk are scared. So, somebody's going to sit down and drink coffee with me and tell me plainly, what has everyone in this house looking like the roof's about to fall on them? A long silence. Then Amos, the stable boy, said in a small voice, "Are you going to send us off, ma'am?" Clara's brow furrowed. Send you off? Why on earth would I do that? That's what the last one said she'd do. He twisted his hat. The master's cousin, Miss Prudence. She came to stay a spell 2 winters back, and said the place was overrun with idle hands, and half of us ought to be turned out to save the master's money. And after she left, 3 men were turned out, and their families with them, in January. And one of the babies, the boy stopped, his throat working. One of the babies didn't make the winter. The kitchen fell into a dead quiet. Clara set down her cup with deliberate care, her hand beginning to tremble, but she willed them to see only steadiness. "Listen to me," she said, her voice now low and even, filling the room like a silence that means something. "I will say this once, and you can hold me to it until the day I die. I am not Miss Prudence. I am not here to save any man his money by turning children out into the snow. Not while I've got breath. If a hand is turned out of this house, it will be over my objection and my grief, and I will fight it with everything the good Lord gave me. You hear? Every one of you." She met each pair of eyes in turn. "You've got a place here. As long as I'm mistress of it, you've got a place." No one spoke. But something moved through that kitchen, slow, disbelieving, like the first thaw in a hard country. Delia, the cook, wiped her hands on her apron, turned to the stove, and poured a second cup of coffee. She set it before Clara without a word, but she set it down gently, and that was a whole conversation. Nathaniel Carter came home at dark, as he did every night, and found his house changed in ways he couldn't name. He noticed it before he understood it. He noticed Amos take his horse at the stable, and, for the first time in longer than he could recall, say, "Evening, Master Carter," instead of merely ducking his head. He noticed the front hall was swept. He noticed the smell of good bread from the kitchen, and voices, actual voices, more than one, murmuring somewhere in the back of the house that had been silent as a tomb for 5 years. He found his supper laid in the study, as always. But there was a jar of wild honeysuckle beside the plate, cut and arranged by a hand that meant kindness. Nathaniel Carter stared at those flowers for a long, uncomfortable while, before he shoved the jar to the far corner of the desk, where he wouldn't have to look at it. He did not go and thank his wife. He told himself there was nothing to thank her for. He told himself the flowers were a woman's foolishness, and the swept hall was Mrs. Abbott's doing, and the voices in the kitchen meant nothing at all. But he did not throw out the honeysuckle. And late that night, when he heard, for he could not help but hear, a light knock at his study door, he found himself, against all sense, saying, "Come." Clara stepped in. She carried a ledger, a great, heavy account book of the estate's holdings that he had not opened in a year. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I know you told me not to speak unless spoken to. So, I'll take my punishment for breaking the rule, whatever it is. But I found something today I believe you'd want to see, and I'd rather be scolded for speaking than let it lie." Nathaniel set down his glass. His eyes went cold. "You've been in my accounts." "I've been in the estate's accounts, yes." She did not flinch. "Mrs. Abbott gave me the run of the house, and I took it. I was raised keeping my father's books from the time I was 11. I know a ledger better than I know my own name." She crossed to the desk and laid the great book before him, opened to a page she'd marked with a ribbon. "And this one, Mr. Carter, is bleeding you white." "Take it out," he said flatly. "Now you're being robbed." The words landed in the study like a dropped plate. Nathaniel went still. "What did you say?" "You heard me right." Clara placed her finger on the page. "Look here, your feed and grain purchases. You've been paying near double the county rate for 2 years, running to a single supplier, a Mr. Harland Voss out of Richmond. And here," she flipped a page, "your timber sold off whole stands of it at a third of what it's worth to the same handful of buyers. And here, another page. Money going out, regular, quarterly. marked only obligations. No name, no note. Near $400 a year. Mr. Carter, walking out of this house to no one I can find, while your fences fall down and your fields die, and you sit here alone in the dark believing you're a rich man. You're not being ruined by grief, sir. You're being ruined by arithmetic. Somebody's been picking your pocket for years, and they've been doing it while you grieved because they knew a grieving man doesn't read his own accounts. Nathaniel Carter stared at the page. He stared at it for a very long time. Then, in a voice that had lost some of its stone, he said, "Who taught a farmer's girl to read a ledger like a Richmond banker?" "My father." Clara's chin came up. The same farmer's father who lost his land to men doing this exact same thing to him. False debts, padded costs, money bleeding out to names that turned out to be no names at all. I've read a ledger like this before, Mr. Carter. I read it the winter I was 21, and I read it too late, and by the time I understood what I was looking at, my father had already lost everything. So, you'll forgive me if I didn't wait for permission to speak. I've watched what silence costs. I'll not watch it again. The study was very quiet. Nathaniel looked from the ledger to the woman standing before him, in her plain, twice-worn dress, and something in his chest, which he had thought frozen solid for 5 years, gave a single, painful crack. He did not know it yet, but that crack would spread. "Sit down," he said. It was not an order this time. It was almost a request. "Show me the rest." They sat over the ledger until the tallow burned low, and for 2 hours, Nathaniel Carter listened to his wife, the way a man listens to a doctor tell him how sick he truly is. She walked him through it, column by column, and the more she showed him, the colder and quieter his face became, not with grief now, but with a slow, gathering fury. "Who handles my correspondence?" he asked at last. "My purchasing? My contracts? All the papers I've not read in 5 years?" Clara hesitated. She had learned the answer that afternoon from Mrs. Abbott, whispered by the pantry, and she had dreaded the moment she'd have to say it aloud. "You know who," she said gently. "You've known who since before I got here. You just haven't let yourself say it." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "My uncle," he said. "Your Uncle William." Clara nodded. "He took over your affairs after Miss Eleanor died. Everyone in this county knows it. He's been the hand behind every contract, every sale, every payment out of this house for 5 years. And in 5 years, Mr. Carter, your estate has gone from the richest holding in the valley to a house full of unpaid, frightened people watching the fields die. I'm not saying it to wound you. I'm saying it because somebody has to, and I appear to be the only person in your life you've forbidden from speaking, which I suppose is why it's fallen to me to be the one who does." Nathaniel opened his eyes, and for one unguarded moment, Clara saw the whole grief of him. The boy who'd lost his love, the man who'd handed his broken life to the nearest pair of hands he thought he could trust, and the dawning, terrible suspicion that those hands had been picking his bones the entire time. "He came to me the week after we buried Eleanor," Nathaniel said, very low, almost to himself. "He wept with me. He said, 'Nathaniel, you're in no state to manage anything. Let me carry the weight. Let me carry it for you, brother son. That's what family's for.'" His hands closed slowly into fists on the desk. And I let him. God help me. I was so glad to hand it over. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to count. I just wanted to grieve and be left alone. He looked up at Clara. "And you're telling me the whole time?" "I'm telling you what's in the book," Clara said quietly. "The book doesn't lie, Mr. Carter. Men do. Books just add." It was near 2 in the morning when a sound came from the front of the house. The crunch of carriage wheels on the drive at an hour no honest visitor keeps. Nathaniel rose. Clara rose with him. "Stay here," he said. "I will not," Clara said, already moving toward the hall. "You've had 5 years of staying alone in the dark, Mr. Carter, and look what it's bought you. Whoever comes calling at 2 in the morning, they can look me in the eye when they do it." Nathaniel caught her arm at the study door. It was the first time he had touched her, the first time since the parson had joined their hands, and they both felt it, and they both pretended they didn't. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," he said low. "Then it's a fine thing," she answered, "that I'm the sort of fool who steps in anyway." The front door opened before they reached it, and a man came in out of the summer dark without knocking, the way a man enters a house he already believes he owns. He was near 60, silver-haired, dressed in good broadcloth with a wide, easy smile, and the warmest eyes Clara had ever mistrusted on sight. "Nathaniel," the man said, spreading his arms. "Nephew, I saw the lamp burning, and I thought, well, the boy can't sleep again, poor soul. I'll sit up with him a spell." His warm gaze slid to Clara, and the smile widened. "And why? This must be the new Mrs. Carter. My dear girl, what a joy. What an absolute joy to meet you at last." He crossed the hall and took her hand in both of his, and pressed it, and his skin was cool and dry, and his grip lingered a half-second too long. "William Carter," he said, "your husband's devoted uncle. Anything you need, my dear. Anything at all. You come to old William. I've been looking after this family's affairs for 5 long years. I know where every penny lives." He beamed. "Consider me your servant." Clara looked into the warm, kind, lying eyes of the man who had destroyed her father, murdered a house's happiness, and picked her husband's fortune to the bone, though she could not yet prove a word of it, and she smiled back at him just as warmly. "How very kind, Mr. Carter," she said sweetly. "I can see already, you're a man who knows exactly where everything is." Behind her, unseen by his uncle Nathaniel, went very still, because he had known his wife one single day, and already he could hear in the honey of her voice the blade she'd hidden underneath it. And God help him, cold, ruined, grieving man that he was. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something dangerously close to hope. He crushed it. He was good at crushing things by now, but it did not die all the way. And in a house that had been dying for 5 years, the smallest living thing is the one that changes everything. "It's late, Uncle," Nathaniel said, and his voice, when he spoke, had an edge to it that had not been there in years. "My wife and I have had a long day. Whatever brought you at this hour, it can wait for morning." William's smile did not falter, but his eyes moved quick from Nathaniel's face to the study door standing open behind him, to the great ledger lying open on the desk in the lamplight, its pages turned back for the first time in a year. Of course," the old man said smoothly. "Rest, both of you. We'll talk in the morning." He bowed to Clara, warm as ever. "Welcome home, my dear," and he let himself out into the dark. But Clara had been watching his eyes, and she had seen exactly where they'd landed, and she knew with the same cold certainty she'd felt the winter she was 21, and understood too late that William Carter had seen the open book, and that a man who has picked a fortune clean for 5 years does not sleep easy the night he learns someone has finally started to count. She turned to her husband in the dim hall. "He saw the ledger," she said. "I know he'll move now fast. Men like him always do, once they know the counting started." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "My father's ruin took 8 months from the day the false debts appeared to the day they took the land. But Papa never knew to look. You know now that changes the arithmetic in our favor, but only if we're quicker than he is." Nathaniel looked at her. This stranger, this bargain, this farmer's daughter he had bought to keep the county quiet, and warned never to speak, standing in his ruined house at 2 in the morning, already fighting a war he hadn't even known he was losing. "Why," he said. The word came out rough. "You owe me nothing, Mrs. Carter. I bought you like a bolt of cloth. I told you to your face I'd never love you. I forbade you to so much as speak. And here you stand in the dead of night, taking my part against my own blood." He shook his head slowly. "You've every reason on earth to let me drown in this. Why fight for me?" And Clara Whitmore, who had lost everything, and married a cold man to save what remained, looked at him for a long, quiet moment. When she answered, her voice was not sweet, and it was not sharp. It was only true. "I'm not fighting for you, Mr. Carter," she said. "I don't know you well enough yet to fight for you, and from what I've seen, you've given me precious little reason to start." She lifted her chin. "I'm fighting for that stable boy who thinks I'll turn him out in the snow. I'm fighting for the baby that didn't make the winter 2 years back, because a woman with a cold heart called good men idle hands. I'm fighting for Delia, and Amos, and Mrs. Abbott, and every frightened soul under this roof, who deserves better than a master, too broken to look at his own accounts." Her eyes held his steady and unafraid. "And maybe somewhere down at the bottom of it, I'm fighting for a farmer 2 counties over who lost everything he built to a man exactly like your uncle, and never once got the chance to fight back." Her voice caught just once, then steadied. "So, no, I'm not doing this for you, but you happen to be standing in the way of all of it, so I reckon for now, we're on the same side of the fight whether you like it or not." She turned and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom, she stopped, and without looking back, she said one thing more. "You told me never to speak to you unless you spoke first." She rested her hand on the banister. "But you're going to need somebody in this house who isn't afraid to tell you the truth, Mr. Carter. And I appear to be the only one left who isn't." A pause. "So, I'll break your rule as often as I have to. You can throw me out for it if you like, but I don't imagine you will because deep down, you already know I'm the first person in 5 years who's told you anything at all worth hearing." And she went up the stairs and left him standing alone in the hall he'd bought and could no longer feel safe in, with a dead woman's memory at his back and a living woman's words ringing in his ears. Words that had cracked in a single day, the ice he'd spent 5 years building around his own heart. Nathaniel Carter stood there a long while. Then he went back into his study, sat down at the desk, and pulled the great ledger toward him. He turned the lamp upright, and for the first time since they'd lowered Eleanor Vance into the ground, the coldest man in Virginia began slowly and grimly to read. The honeysuckle in its jar sat in the corner where he'd shoved it. He looked at it once, then he reached over, drew it back to the center of the desk where the light could reach it, and left it there. And so it began, not with love, for love was still a long, hard road away, but with a single open book, a single jar of wild flowers, and a farmer's daughter upstairs, who had married a fortune, buried her fear, and decided, come what may, that she would not spend her one life being grateful for scraps. The morning after William Carter let himself out into the dark, Clara Whitmore came down the stairs before the sun and found her husband still at his desk, unshaven, the ledger open, the lamp burned dry, and 100 loose papers spread across the floor like a snowfall. "You didn't sleep," she said. Nathaniel didn't look up. "Neither did you by the look of you. I don't sleep the night before a war. Never have." She stepped over the papers and set a cup of Delaya's coffee down at his elbow. "Drink that. You'll need your wits." And a man with no sleep and no coffee has neither. He looked at the cup, then at her. "You made me coffee. Dia made it. I carried it. Don't make more of it than it is." But she said it gently, and she pulled a chair to the other side of the desk and sat. And for a moment, the two of them just looked at the wreckage of 5 years spread out on the floor between them. "I've been reading since you went up," Nathaniel said. His voice was hoarse. "I read till the lamp died, and then I lit another. And Clara," he stopped. It was the first time he'd used her Christian name, and they both marked it, and neither said a word about it. "It's worse than you showed me. Far worse. It isn't just the feed and the timber and the 400 a year going out to no name. Look here." He turned a paper toward her. Clara leaned in. "Land," she said slowly. "Land." His finger moved down a column. 3 parcels. The bottom land along the creek, the North Wood lot, and the old Hensley tract I bought the year before Eleanor died. All 3 sold in the last 2 years. Sold Clara, my land, deed away over my own signature." He sat back, "And I have no memory of signing a single one of them." Clara went very still. "You're certain?" "I'd remember selling the creek bottom. That's the best water on the whole holding. My grandfather cleared it. I'd sooner cut off my own hand than sell it." He pushed the paper away, as if it burned him. "But there's my name at the bottom, plain as day. My name and a witness and a seal." "Who witnessed it?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "My uncle. And who bought it? That's the part that turns my stomach." He drew out another sheet. "A company. The Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern. Richmond address. I never heard of it in my life." He looked up at her. "But you have that look on your face. You've heard of it?" Clara had gone pale. "No," she said quietly. "But I've heard it's like when they took my father's land. Mr. Carter, the buyer wasn't a man. It was a company, a concern with a fine long name and a Richmond address, and not one soul you could find to shake a hand or answer a question. That's how they do it. A man you can face, a man you can call a liar to his teeth. But a company, she shook her head, a company is just a name on a paper, and you can't sue a name, and you can't shame a name. And by the time you learn, there's nothing behind it but the very man who robbed you. The land's changed hands 3 times over, and it's gone for good. She looked at him. We need to find out who owns that concern, because I'd stake my life. The answer is a man we've already met. Nathaniel was quiet a moment, then low. How would a woman even begin to find such a thing? And Clara Whitmore smiled, not sweetly this time, but with the hard, bright edge of someone who has been beaten once and swore never to be beaten the same way twice. The same way my father should have, she said, by asking questions of the one man in this whole business who was too small to be worth buying off. There's always one, Mr. Carter. A clerk, a witness, a boy who carried the papers, somebody handled these deeds who wasn't paid enough to lie. Well, we find him, and we make him talk. Before Nathaniel could answer, boots sounded in the hall, quick and heavy, and Mrs. Abbott appeared in the doorway with her face gone white. Master Carter, the old woman said, your uncle's back. He's coming up the drive right now, and he's not alone. He's got the sheriff with him. Nathaniel was on his feet before she finished speaking. Clara moved faster. She swept every loose paper on the floor into her arms in one motion, stacked them, and had the great ledger closed and under her elbow before the front door so much as rattled. He can't see we've been reading, she said low and fast. You understand me. If he knows how much you know, he'll move quicker than we can. Let him think you're still the grieving man who doesn't count. Let him think I'm nothing but a farm girl playing at housekeeping. Play stupid, Mr. Carter. Play ruined. It's the only card we've got, and we've got exactly one chance to fool him with it. Nathaniel looked at his wife of one day standing there with his whole ruined estate clutched to her chest, telling him how to save it. And something in him bent toward her like iron toward a lodestone. I've never been able to play a part in my life, he admitted. Then let me do the talking. She thrust the ledger at Mrs. Abbott. Hide this now. And Delia's kitchen. Not upstairs. They'll search the study before they search a cook's pantry. The old woman took it and vanished. Clara turned back to Nathaniel, and before she could think better of it, reached up and smoothed the collar of his shirt, the way a wife does, because a wife would. You look like a man who's been up all night worried sick over money. Good. Look exactly like that. It happens to be true. The door swung open. First came William Carter, radiating his usual warmth and a smile that could melt glaciers. Trailing him was a burly man, a tin star pinned to his coat, his face set like a clenched fist. Nathaniel William threw his arms wide. So glad you're up and about. I've brought Sheriff Doyle along for a little business matter. Nothing to trouble yourself over, mind you, but you know how these legalities require a signature. And I thought, why send a mere scribe? I'll come myself and see my boy while I'm at it. His kind eyes found Clara and softened. And a good morning to you, my dear. Up with the sun, I see. A proper wife already. Good morning, Mr. Carter, Clara replied, dipping her head with all the sweetness she could muster. You'll forgive our state. My husband was up half the night. He does worry so. She let a touch of helplessness color her tone. Money troubles. I try to tell him it'll all work out. But you know how men fret. She watched William's face, searching for the reaction she'd hoped for. And there it was, a flicker of pure, satisfied ease. Good, she thought. She's a fool. He's still fretting and blind. Nothing's changed. Money troubles, William echoed, his voice dripping with sympathy. Yes, of course. Which is precisely why I've come. He drew a paper from his coat and laid it on the hall table, his movements as smooth as a card sharp dealing a hand. Nathaniel, my boy, I've found a buyer for the West pasture. A fine price. Better than fine. It'll settle your quarter's obligations and leave a little besides. All it needs is your name. He held out a pen. Right here at the bottom. You needn't even read it. I've read it a dozen times. It's all in order. I'd never bring you anything that wasn't. And there it was. The entire scheme laid bare before Clara's eyes in the stark light of day. You needn't even read it. 5 years of those 4 words. 5 years of a grieving man signing away his very bones. because the warmest voice in his life told him he didn't need to look. Nathaniel's hand began to rise toward the pen. Clara's heart seized. If he signed, they lost the pasture. If he refused, William would know he'd started reading, and the whole charade would collapse. There was no winning move. There was only, "Oh, Mr. Carter, wait." Clara stepped forward, wringing her hands, the very picture of a fretful new wife. "I'm so sorry to be a bother, but the West pasture, isn't that the one with the family graves? Miss Eleanor's people, I was told. Only the ladies at church mentioned such a thing yesterday, and I confess, I've been fretting over whether it's proper to sell ground with graves in it. And I'd never forgive myself if I let it go, and then found we'd sold Miss Eleanor's own kin out from under her stone." She turned wide, worried eyes on William. "Is that the pasture, Mr. Carter? You'd know. You know where everything is. You said so yourself." It was a lie. Clara had no idea if there were graves in the West pasture. She'd conjured it whole in that instant, out of nothing but a name and a hunch. But she watched William's face and saw the calculation flash behind his warm eyes. Could there be the church ladies, talk of a scandal, Eleanor's name dragged up? She saw him decide in half a second that he could not afford to be caught selling a girl's grave. "You know," William said smoothly, tucking the paper back into his coat, "the dear child may have a point. Best not to rush a thing like that. Wouldn't do to give the gossips fresh meat. We'll leave the pasture for now, Nathaniel. I'll find another parcel. No trouble at all." He patted the table. "See how a good wife looks after a man. You chose better than you knew, nephew." "I begin to think I did," Nathaniel said quietly, and for once, his words were not an act. Sheriff Doyle, who had come all this way for a signature and gotten none, shifted his weight and cleared his throat. "So there's no business today then, William? You dragged me clear out here for nothing." "Not nothing, Sheriff, not nothing. A pleasant morning call on my only nephew is never nothing." But there was the smallest edge in William's voice now, the first hairline crack in all that honey, and Clara filed it away. He didn't like being told no. He didn't like leaving with the paper still in his pocket. A man used to getting his signature every time he asked for it had just been turned away by a farm girl's chatter, and it had cost him something, and he knew it. He recovered fast. He always would. "Well," he clapped his hands together, "I'll leave you good people to your morning. Nathaniel, rest. You look worn to the bone. Let old William carry the weight. That's what I'm here for." He moved toward the door, then paused, his warm eyes sweeping the hall one slow time. They landed on the study door, standing ajar, and the desk beyond, and the lamp burned down to nothing, and the chair pulled close to the desk on the far side, a second chair where no second person had sat in 5 years. His smile didn't change, but his eyes lingered a half-second too long on that second chair. "Reading, were you, Nathaniel?" he said lightly. "Burned a whole lamp. That's not like you." The silence stretched one beat too far. "Couldn't sleep," Nathaniel said, "so I sat with the book. Eleanor's Bible." He didn't blink. First time in 5 years I could bear to open it. It was the finest lie Clara had ever heard a bad liar tell, and it landed because it was armored in real grief. And William, who traded in that grief, who'd built his whole fortune on it, could not for once tell where the true feeling ended and the lie began. "That's good, son," William said softly. "That's good." Eleanor would be glad, and he went out. The moment the carriage wheels crunched away down the drive, Nathaniel let out a breath like a man who'd been held under water. "Graves," he said, "in the West pasture." "There are no graves in the West pasture," Clara stated. "I know there are no graves in the West pasture. I own the West pasture." She stared at him. "You made it up whole on the spot," to his face. "I gave him a reason to want to say no," she explained. "That had nothing to do with you." Clara set her hands on her hips, her body trembling a little now that it was over, but her voice held steady. "That's the trick of it, Mr. Carter. You never fight a man like that head on. You never say, 'I won't sign.' You hand him a reason he'd rather not, and let him think it's his own idea to walk away. A cornered man is dangerous. A man who thinks he chose to leave the corner is just relieved." She let out a long breath. "My father never learned that. He met them straight on every time, with the truth in his fist, and they broke him over it. I swore if my day ever came, I'd fight them the way they fight, sideways and smiling. Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. Your father, he said. You keep speaking of him. Is he alive? Clara's throat worked. Alive, but not living, if you take my meaning. He's in a rented room in Lynchburg with my aunt looking after him. The ruin took something out of him. It never gave back. Same as the grief took something out of you. She met his eyes. That's the thing I couldn't say to you last night, Mr. Carter. You and my father are the same wound. You just got yours from a woman dying, and he got his from thieves. But it's the same hollowing out. I've been watching it eat a man I love for 2 years. So when I saw it on you, she stopped. That's the real reason I couldn't leave your accounts alone. I couldn't save my papa. But I'll be damned if I'll stand by and watch it happen to a second man in the same room I'm standing in. The hall was very quiet. Clara. Nathaniel took a step toward her. I owe you an apology I don't know how to make. Everything I said to you in that carriage later. She held up a hand, her voice steadying into something brisk, for she could not afford to feel too much just now, and neither could he. Apologize to me later, Mr. Carter, when we've won. Right now, we've got a company to find behind a Richmond address, and a clerk somewhere who witnessed a deed he shouldn't have, and a very warm-eyed thief who just noticed a second chair in your study. She turned toward the kitchen. He knows something's changed. He doesn't know how much. That buys us a little time, but not much. So, drink your coffee, and let's go to work. They rode to Richmond 3 days later, in the estate's one good carriage, and Clara Whitmore learned in those 3 days more about her husband than she'd learned in the wedding that made her his wife. She learned he'd nearly been a surveyor before he was a landowner, that he'd wanted to map the far country west of the mountains before his father died and left him a fortune he never asked for. She learned he read Greek. She learned his mother had died when he was 10. Same as you, he said quietly, when she told him about her own, and that his father had gone hard afterward, and that Nathaniel had spent his whole boyhood trying to thaw a cold man, which was, she thought but did not say, likely why he'd let himself go cold in exactly the same way when his own grief came. And she learned, watching him hand her down from the carriage on Richmond Street, that Nathaniel Carter had begun, without quite knowing it, and much against his own will, to look at her as if she were a person, and not a bargain, and not a burden, but a person the way a man looks at someone whose thoughts he has come to want to hear. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself the same thing he'd told himself about the honeysuckle, and she was exactly as convincing as he'd been. The Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern kept an office over a chandler shop on a narrow street near the river. Clara had guessed they would find one of 2 things behind the door, either a fine room full of clerks and lies, or nothing at all. They found nothing at all. A single dusty room, a single desk, and a single, frightened young man of perhaps 20, who leapt to his feet when they entered, and knocked over his own inkwell doing it. Can I help you?" the young man stammered. Clara looked at him, ink on his fingers, a patched coat, a face that had never learned to lie, because it had never been paid enough to. There he is, she thought. There's the small one, the one too cheap to buy off. You can, she said gently, taking the seat across from him before he could think to stop her. What's your name, son? Ezra. Ezra Pauling, ma'am. I'm the clerk. The only one, mostly. He looked from Clara to the tall, grim man behind her, and swallowed. Are you buyers? Only Mr. Voss handles the buying. And he's not. He's not in today. He's most days not in. Voss. Nathaniel's voice cut across the room. Harlan Voss. Ye. Yes, sir. Mr. Voss. He owns the concern. Leastways, he signs for it. Ezra's eyes darted between them. Is something wrong? Have I done something wrong? I only keep the books. I don't, whatever it is, I only wrote down what I was told to. Ezra. Clara leaned forward, her voice the voice she'd use on a spooked horse or a frightened child, low and warm and certain. Look at me, son. Nobody here thinks you've done anything wrong. I can see plain you're an honest boy in a dishonest office, and that's not your fault. And I'm not here to make it your fault. She let that settle into him, watched his shoulders drop an inch. But I need you to help me. A wicked thing was done to a family. My family, Ezra, my own father, land taken. That shouldn't have been. And I think, without knowing it, without meaning a lick of harm, you wrote some of it down. And I think you've got a good enough heart that it sat wrong with you ever since, hasn't it? The young man's lip trembled. And Clara knew with a rush of certainty that she'd read him true. That this boy had been sitting in this dusty room for years, writing down deeds he half suspected were crooked, telling himself it wasn't his business, and hating himself a little more each day for the telling. I don't, Ezra started, and stopped. His eyes filled. I'm not supposed to say anything. Mr. Voss said, he said if anybody ever came asking, I was to say I didn't know a thing, and he'd see me, right? And if I talked, the boy's voice dropped to a whisper, he'd see me wrong, is what he said. He's not a kind man, ma'am. He looks ordinary, but he's not kind. No, Clara agreed softly. His sword never is. She reached across the desk and very gently laid her hand over the boy's ink-stained one. Ezra, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to ask you one question, and after that, you'll never see me again if you don't want to. My father was a farmer, a good man. He raised his crops and paid his hands and never cheated a soul in 50 years. And men like your Mr. Voss took everything he had, and they broke his heart doing it. And he sits in a rented room now, an old man before his time, staring at a wall. That's what these deeds you write down do, son. That's the far end of the paper. There's a broken old man at the end of every one of them. Her hand tightened on his. So, here's my question, and you answer it, or not, as your conscience tells you. Who really owns the Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern? Not who signs. Who owns it? Whose money? Whose pocket does the profit finally land in? The room was so quiet. Clara could hear the chandler's boy whistling in the shop below. Ezra Pauling looked at her hand on his. Then he looked up, and there were tears standing in his eyes, and something in his young face gave way all at once. 5 years of swallowed conscience breaking loose. Voss don't own it, he whispered. Voss is just a name for the papers. Same as I'm a name for the papers. There's a book, a real book, not the one for showing. Voss keeps it locked, but I've seen inside it. I've had to true up the figures. He wiped his eyes with his ink-stained sleeve. Every dollar the concern takes in, ma'am, every parcel it buys cheap and sells dear, it all goes one place. It all goes to a man out in the country. A gentleman owns a big estate. Voss calls him the principal. Won't ever say his name out loud, but I've seen it written. I've seen it 100 times. The boy's throat worked. Carter. That's the name in the true book. William Carter. Clara did not move. Beside her, she felt Nathaniel go rigid as a fence post. You're certain, she said quietly. I've written it 100 times, ma'am. I could write it in my sleep. Ezra looked between them, and his frightened eyes went slowly wide as he took in the tall man's face, the graven jaw gone white, the fists closing at his sides. Why? Why do you two look like that? Who are you? My name, Nathaniel said, and his voice came out low and terrible, is Carter. Nathaniel Carter. William Carter is my father's brother, and for 5 years he has been selling my land to his own company, and telling me I was ruined by grief. He looked at the boy as if from a great distance. You've just told me my uncle robbed me, the way he robbed my father. The same way, the same company, the same man. And Ezra Pauling, 20 years old and ink-stained and honest, said the thing that turned the whole matter from a robbery into something far worse. Then you're the one, sir. The boy had gone gray. You're the one from the other book. Clara felt the floor tilt. What other book, Ezra? There's a page in the true book older than all the land deeds. The boy was shaking now, the words tumbling out of him past the point of stopping. It's from before my time. I only found it once, tucked in the back, and Voss caught me looking and near took my head off. But I saw it. Just a minute, but I saw it. He looked at Nathaniel with a kind of horror. It was an account, sir. Money paid out, a payment for a service rendered, dated the spring of 1811. And the man it was paid to, Ezra swallowed, was a physician, a doctor. And what the money was paid for, sir. Written right there in Voss's own hand. Say it, Nathaniel said. His voice had no bottom to it. For attendance upon Miss E. Vance, the boy whispered, and for his discretion regarding the same. The dusty little room went silent as a grave. Clara heard her own heartbeat. She heard the whistling boy in the shop below, and she heard beside her the terrible sound of her husband ceasing to breathe. Discretion. She thought, you don't pay a doctor for his discretion over a fever. A fever is nothing to hide. Eleanor, Nathaniel said. The name came out of him broken. He paid the doctor. My uncle paid Eleanor's doctor for his discretion. Nathaniel. Clara was on her feet, her hand on his arm, gripping hard. Nathaniel, look at me. Not here. Not in front of the boy. You hear me? Whatever this is, we do not fall to pieces in a stranger's office. We take it home, and we look at it in the cold light. But her own voice was shaking now because she understood what he understood. What any fool could understand. That a man does not pay for a doctor's silence over a natural death, and that the fever that carried off Eleanor Vance 5 springs ago and hollowed out the man Clara had married might not have been a fever at all. Nathaniel Carter turned to her, and Clara had never in her life seen such a thing happen to a human face. 5 years of frozen grief cracked straight through in an instant, and under the ice was not sorrow. Under the ice was rage, a clean, white, killing rage. The rage of a man who has just learned that the loss which ruined his life was not fate at all, but a murder, and that he has spent 5 years handing his fortune to the murderer and calling him family. He killed her, Nathaniel said very quietly, which was worse than any shout. He killed Eleanor, and then he sat with me while I wept, and he took my hand, and he said, "Let me carry the weight, brother's son," and I let him. His eyes came up to Clara's, and they were burning. I have spent 5 years grieving a woman, my own blood put in the ground, and I thanked him for his kindness. We don't know that yet, Clara said, though every bone in her body already believed it. A payment isn't proof. Discretion could mean there could be another reason. You don't believe that? No, she admitted. I don't. But I've been ruined once by acting on a thing I felt in my gut before I could prove it, Mr. Carter, and I'll not see you ruined the same way. A feeling won't hang him. A feeling won't even shame him. We need that book, the true book, Voss's book with the doctor's payment in it, and the land, and your uncle's name all in one place, in his own hand. She turned to the trembling clerk. Ezra, where does Voss keep it? I can't. The boy backed against the wall. I can't, ma'am. He'll kill me. You don't understand. He told me if I ever... Ezra. Clara crossed to him, and she took his shaking hands in both of hers, and she held his frightened eyes with her own. You listen to me, son. You've carried this alone for years, and it's been eating you alive. I can see it plain. You're not a bad man. You're a good man in a bad place, and every honest bone you've got has been screaming at you to do something, and you've been too scared, and I don't blame you one bit. But that's over now. Her voice dropped fierce and low. That book put my father in a rented room. That book maybe put an innocent girl in her grave. And you are the only living soul outside of 2 thieves who knows where it lies. You didn't ask for that. But it's yours now. God's a strange one, Ezra. He hands the whole weight of a thing to the smallest person in the room, the one nobody thought to buy off, and he says, "Now, son, what'll you do?" She squeezed his hands. So, what'll you do? The clerk looked at her. He looked at the tall, grim, ruined man behind her. He looked down at his own ink-stained hands, shaking in hers. And Ezra Pauling, who had written down 100 lies because he was afraid, made the bravest choice of his small life. The false book he keeps in the desk, he whispered, for anybody who comes asking. But the true one, he swallowed, he keeps at his lodging. Not here. Number 9 on Carey Street. Locked in a strongbox under his own bed, and he wears the key on a chain round his neck night and day. I've seen it. The boy's voice dropped so low Clara had to lean close. But there's one night a week he takes it off. Thursdays he goes to a house, a gambling house on the docks, and he don't like to lose the key at cards or have it lifted off him by some woman, so he leaves the strongbox and the key, both with the landlady. a Mrs. Cobb, and she keeps it in her parlor cabinet till he comes home come Friday morning. Ezra's eyes were huge. That's the only night, ma'am. Thursday. The key and the book, both together, both out of his keeping, in an old woman's parlor. But you didn't hear it from me. Please, whatever you do, you never heard my name. Clara straightened slowly. Ezra Pauling, she said quietly. As far as any living soul will ever know, we never met you, and we never came to this office, and your name will never once cross my lips, or my husband's, from this day to the grave. You have my word, and my husband's, and the word of a Carter is about to start meaning something honest again in this state. She looked at Nathaniel. Isn't it, Mr. Carter? It is. Ezra, Nathaniel said, when this is done, when it's over, you come to Carter Manor. There's honest work for an honest clerk, and I'll see you kept safe, and I'll see you kept well. You've my word on that, too. Ezra Pauling looked at the two of them, and for the first time since they'd walked through his door, some of the terror went out of his young face, replaced by something Clara recognized because she'd felt it herself 3 days back, standing in a frightened kitchen at dawn. It was the look of a person who has spent a long time, small and afraid, being told for the first time that they are seen, and that they matter, and that they are not alone. Thursday, the boy said. Go on a Thursday. They did not speak in the carriage for a long while on the road back. There was too much, and none of it could be said in a rattling carriage with a hired driver up top. But somewhere past the ferry, in the long gold light of the summer evening, Nathaniel Carter finally spoke, and his voice had changed. The stone was gone out of it. What was left underneath was rawer and far more human. I have to tell you something, he said, looking straight ahead, and I need you to let me say the whole of it before you answer. Clara folded her hands. Go on. When I married you, I told you it was to quiet the county, to secure the family name. That was a lie. Not the whole of it, but a lie. His jaw worked. The truth is that after 5 years, I could no longer stand to be in that house alone with her ghost. I couldn't stand the silence. I couldn't stand the thinking. And I told myself if I brought a stranger into the house, someone I owed nothing and felt nothing for, the noise of another person living there would drown it out. That's what you were meant to be, Clara. Noise. A thing to fill a silence I couldn't bear. He drew a hard breath. I bought you to be furniture. I told myself you'd be grateful and quiet, and I'd never have to know you, and the emptiness would just stop echoing. That's the man I was 11 days ago. I want you to know exactly how low a thing I did, because in a minute I'm going to say something else, and I don't want you thinking I've forgotten the low thing to say it. Clara said nothing. She had gone very still. And then you walked into my kitchen and told a room full of frightened people you'd fight for them with your dying breath. He turned and looked at her now, full on. And you opened a book I'd been too much of a coward to open for a year. And you found the thief in my house in a single night. And you stood in front of my uncle and lied like a river to save my land, while I'd have signed it away like a fool. And you took a terrified boy's hands in a dusty room, and you made him brave. His voice roughened. You were supposed to be furniture, Clara Whitmore, and instead, you turned out to be the first living person to walk into that dead house in 5 years. I bought you to fill a silence, and you didn't fill it. You ended it. The carriage rattled onward. Clara glanced at her hands, finding them strangely indistinct. That was quite a speech, Mr. Carter, she finally managed, her voice not quite as steady as she'd intended. For a man who, just 11 days ago, told me never to speak unless spoken to. I am speaking to you now, he replied softly, and I doubt I'll ever stop again. Don't. Clara's head lifted, a warning glinting in her eyes, mingled with something else beneath. Don't offer me sweet words, Nathaniel Carter. Not now, not tonight, not after what we've just unearthed, with your dead Eleanor's name still fresh on both our tongues, and her murder, if it was murder, less than an hour cold in the telling. You're a man who's just discovered his entire grief was a fabrication. Someone sold you out. You're not thinking straight, and it would be the simplest thing in the world to cling to the nearest living warmth to keep from drowning, and I just happened to be sitting closest. She held his gaze, fierce and fearful. I've been furniture before. I will not be a raft. The words struck him. She saw them land. "That's fair," Nathaniel said after a moment, his voice low. "More than fair. I'll take it back then. Not because it isn't true. It's the truest thing I've said in 5 years. But because you're right, tonight is not the night to say it, and you deserve to hear it on a night you can believe it." He was silent for a beat. "But I will say it again, Clara. When this is over, when your feet are on solid ground and mine are too, and there's no thief left in my house, and no ghost left unaccounted for, I will say it again, plainly. And you can believe it or not, but I will say it." Clara turned her face towards her own window, so he wouldn't see her. "We'll see, Mr. Carter," she murmured. "We'll see what's left of either of us when this is done." Yet, a small smile played on her lips in the carriage's darkness, unseen by him. And her heart, which she had so carefully walled off, much like he had his, gave a single, traitorous thud against the stone. They arrived at Carter Manor in the pitch black, and Mrs. Abbott met them on the steps, a lamp in her hand and a face etched with worry. "Master Carter, thank God you're back." The old woman's voice trembled. "Your uncle was here this afternoon while you were gone, and he wasn't paying a social call this time." She raised the lamp higher, her aged eyes wide with fear. "He came with 2 men and a wagon. He said you'd given him leave to take the north herd to market on your behalf. Said it was arranged. And when I said I'd heard nothing of it, he said an old housekeeper has no call to question the master's own uncle. And he took 40 head of cattle, sir. Drove them off." Nathaniel's face hardened. "That's a quarter of everything I have left on 4 legs, he said quietly. "There's more." Mrs. Abbott's hand shook as she held the lamp. "Before he left, he stood right there in the hall where you are standing now, and he looked at me for a long, cold while, and the warmth just drained right out of his face. Sir, all of it. The first time I ever saw the real man beneath it in 20 years. She swallowed. "And he said, 'You tell my nephew when he's back from his little journey to Richmond, you tell him old Williams carried this family for a long time, and it would be a sorrowful thing if the boy forgot who holds the weight. Sorrowful for everyone, you tell him that.'" The old woman looked between them. "It was a threat, Master Carter. As warm as he ever talks. That was a threat, plain as I've ever heard one." Nathaniel's gaze was hard. Clara and Nathaniel exchanged a look in the lamplight. "He knows we went to Richmond," Clara said softly. "He doesn't know what we found, but he knows we're looking. And he just took 40 head of cattle in broad daylight to show us he can. And to bleed you faster before you can move." She turned to Mrs. Abbott. "When did he leave exactly?" "Gone 3 hours, near enough. And today is Gay Tuesday, Mrs. Carter." Clara felt it settle into her like a cold stone dropping into a well. She looked at Nathaniel. 2 days, she said. "Thursday is the only night the book and the key are out of Voss's keeping. Ezra said so. Thursday at Mrs. Cobb's on Carey Street, or we wait a whole week for the next one." Her voice dropped. "And your uncle just told us, in his own warm and murdering way, that he's done waiting. He's moving now. He'll bleed you dry and buy off anyone who's seen too much. And if he so much as suspects that clerk talked." She stopped, thinking of Ezra Pauling's frightened, honest face. "We have 2 days, Nathaniel. 2 days to get that book out of Richmond, before your uncle either destroys it or destroys the boy who told us where it lies. And Thursday is the only door we get." Nathaniel Carter stood on the steps of the dead house his uncle had killed to inherit, with his stolen cattle likely somewhere on a Richmond road, a murdered woman's name in his mouth, and a farmer's daughter beside him, who had walked into his ruin 11 days ago and refused, day after day, to let him drown in it. The stone was gone from him for good now. What stood in its place was harder than stone, warmer, and far more dangerous to the man who had made him. "Then we've got 2 days, he said. And he turned and looked at Clara, and for the first time since a preacher had joined their unwilling hands beneath a wooden arch, she saw the whole of the man Eleanor Vance must once have loved. Not the ruin, not the ice, but the warm, reckless, and determined man beneath 5 years of grief. "Get what sleep you can, Mrs. Carter. We ride for Richmond at first light." And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune and found a war, who had buried her fear and cracked a frozen heart and set her feet on a road from which there was no turning back, lifted her chin in the lamplight and answered him the only way she knew how. "I've never slept the night before a war in my life, Mr. Carter," she said, "but I reckon I'll ride just fine without it." They rode for Richmond at first light, and by the time the sun stood high, they were still a full day short of Thursday, which was precisely the problem Clara had lain awake, turning over all the short hours of the night. "We're too early," she said as the horses ate up the road. "2 days, and only one of them any use to us. Voss keeps the book on him every night, but Thursday. So what do we do with tomorrow, Nathaniel? Sit in a Richmond boarding house and pray your uncle doesn't find that boy first?" "We don't sit," Nathaniel said. "We use it." Ezra said, "Voss keeps a false book at the office, the one for anybody who comes asking. If we're to take the true book Thursday night, I want to know exactly what the false one says first. I want to know the lie before I hold the truth, so I can prove the one against the other." Clara turned to look at him. "That's good thinking." "I had a fine teacher these past 11 days, he said, and did not look at her when he said it. And Clara felt her face warm, and was glad of the horses jostling to blame it on. They came into Richmond by afternoon, and took 2 rooms at a quiet house well away from the river, under the name Whitmore rather than Carter. Clara's idea. "Your name's known here now," she said. "Voss knows it, your uncle's men know it. But nobody in this city ever heard of a farmer named Whitmore. And that's the whole use of marrying a nobody, Mr. Carter." And Nathaniel had looked at her a moment and said, "Lo, you're not a nobody. You never were. You were just the only one who hadn't been told yet." And Clara had busied herself with her gloves and not answered. They meant to watch the office the next morning to learn Voss's habits before they moved. But the whole careful plan came apart before it began. Because when they walked past the chandler shop on Carey Street a little before noon, meaning only to mark the door, they found it standing open, and a knot of people gathered on the walk and a constable in the street. Clara's blood went cold. "Nathaniel, something's happened." They pushed close enough to hear. A washerwoman was telling it to anyone who'd listen, her voice pitched high with the pleasure some folks take in bad news that isn't theirs. "There had been a robbery in the night," she said. "The land office over the Chandlers. Someone had broken in and turned it upside down. Papers everywhere, the desk smashed clean apart. And the young clerk who worked there, the quiet one, the Pauling boy." Clara's hand found Nathaniel's sleeve and gripped it hard enough to hurt. "The boy had been found this morning at the foot of the office stairs with his neck broke," the washerwoman said. "And wasn't it a shame, such a young thing? And the constable was calling it a fall, said the boy must have come in the night to stop the robber, and tumbled down the dark stairs in the struggle. But she'd heard the boy was mortal afraid of the dark, and never once set foot in that office after sundown, not once in 3 years. So what was he doing there at midnight? She'd like to know, and nobody could tell her. And wasn't it a shame?" Clara could not breathe. "He's dead," she whispered. "Nathaniel, that boy is dead. Ezra, we sat with him yesterday. We took his hands. We promised him." Her voice broke apart. "We promised him he'd be safe. We promised him honest work. We told him nobody would ever know his name. And he's dead. Not 1 day after, with his neck broke at the bottom of a stair. He was too frightened to climb in the dark." "Clara," Nathaniel's own voice was terrible. He took her by both arms and turned her away from the crowd, walked her fast and firm down the walk and around a corner where no one could see her face. "Clara, look at me." "Not here. You cannot fall to pieces on this street. You told me that yourself, 3 days back in that very office. Not here." She was shaking all over. He was a boy. He was 20 years old, and he'd been carrying that book's weight alone for years, and he was so afraid. And the one brave thing he ever did in his life was tell us where it lay, and it killed him. Your uncle killed him for it, Nathaniel. Sure as if he'd pushed him down that stair with his own 2 hands, and he probably did. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep the sound in. "This is my doing. I made him brave. I sat there and I took his hands and I told him God had handed him the weight of the thing, and I made him brave, and it got him killed. No." Nathaniel's grip tightened. "No. You listen to me now, the way I've listened to you. My uncle killed that boy, not you. William Carter has killed before. We both know it. Now, we've known it since yesterday, and he'd have killed that boy the moment he suspected he'd talked. Whether you'd been gentle with him or cruel, you didn't make Ezra brave, Clara. You gave him one day of being seen and thanked and told he mattered, after years of nobody caring whether he lived or died. If that boy had to die at my uncle's hand, then thank God the last thing he did on this earth was a brave thing done for good people who kept faith with him. You didn't spend his life. My uncle spent it. Don't you dare take that man's sin onto your own back. You haven't the room for it. You're carrying too much already. Clara looked up at him, her eyes streaming, and she saw that his own were wet, and that steadied her more than any words could have. That this hard, cold man was weeping too, for a clerk he'd known a single day. He knew, Nathaniel said quietly. That's the part that guts me. Voss or my uncle, they knew someone had come asking for the book. The office turned over. They weren't robbing the place, Clara. They were cleaning it. They came for the false book, and any scrap that might point back at them. And they found the boy there, or brought him there. And they made sure the one witness who could name them would never speak again. His jaw work, which means they know we're close. And it means he stopped. It means the true book. Clara's voice turned hollow and hard. The one at Mrs. Cobb's. The one Voss leaves with the landlady on Thursdays. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. If they're cleaning house, Nathaniel, that book is the biggest thing left to clean. Voss won't leave it lying in an old woman's parlor cabinet now. Not with someone sniffing after it. Tomorrow's Thursday. It may be the last Thursday that book ever exists. If we don't take it tomorrow night, your uncle burns it. And every crime the man ever committed. Your land, my father's land. That poor boy's neck. And whatever truly happened to Eleanor. It all goes up the chimney with it. And there's no proving a word of it ever again. They stood close together on the empty side street, and the whole shape of the thing had changed in the space of a single overheard washerwoman's tale. It was not a search anymore. It was a race against a fire. Then we don't wait for a plan, Nathaniel said. We take it tomorrow night. However, it can be done. We take it tomorrow night, Clara agreed. And then, quiet, fierce to the memory of a frightened, honest boy she'd known one day, and failed to keep safe. And we hang that man with the very book he killed you to hide, Ezra Pauling. I swear it on my father's name. You'll not have died for nothing. Not while I've got breath. Mrs. Cobb's lodging house on Carey Street was a narrow brick thing, 3 stories tall, respectable enough by daylight, and Clara studied it from across the way for the better part of an hour that Thursday afternoon, while Nathaniel watched the street. They had spent the morning learning what they could. Harlan Voss did indeed go out on Thursday nights. A hired boy at the corner told them so for a penny. Said the gentleman on the second floor went to the docks every Thursday regular as church, and came home sour and broke every Friday dawn. And the landlady, Mrs. Cobb, was a widow of near 70, who kept a tidy house, went hard of hearing, and took a glass of hot toddy every night at 9, and slept like the dead after 9 o'clock. Clara said Voss gone to his gambling, the old woman deep in her toddy and the book and the key, both in her parlor cabinet. She let out a slow breath. It's as clean a window as we'll ever get, and it's the last one. So the only question left is how we get into a locked house and a locked cabinet, without waking a woman who may or may not sleep as deep as a corner boy claims. I could force the door, Nathaniel said, and leave it splintered, for Voss to find Friday morning. He'd know inside a minute the book was taken, and by whom, and he'd have your uncle warned before we made it back to the manor. No, Clara shook her head. This has to be quiet. It has to be a theft. Nobody knows was a theft, until it's far too late to matter. Voss has to go on thinking that book is safe in that cabinet for as long as we can manage, so that when we finally spring it on your uncle, he's got no warning. No time to run. No time to spin a fresh lie. She was quiet a moment, thinking. There's only one clean way into a locked house, Mr. Carter. Somebody has to be invited in. Nathaniel frowned. Invited by an old widow who's never laid eyes on us? By an old widow, Clara said slowly, an idea gathering behind her eyes, who is lonely and hard of hearing, and takes in lodgers because she needs the money and the company both. A widow like that, Nathaniel, doesn't fear a knock at her door of an evening. She welcomes it, especially. She looked down at her own worn dress, especially from a sweet young woman traveling alone, who's just arrived in the city, and heard tell that Mrs. Cobb keeps the cleanest, most respectable rooms on Carey Street, and might there be one to let. And oh, what a lovely parlor might a body sit a spell. She's so weary from the road. Nathaniel looked at her. You mean to walk in the front door, he said, and have her invite you to sit in the very room where the book is. I mean to be the most harmless, tiresome, chattering young woman that poor deaf widow ever had the misfortune to meet, Clara said. I mean to wear her out, with talk of my dear departed mother, and my long sad journey, and my hopes for a room until 9 o'clock comes, and her toddy calls, and she's so glad to be shut of me. She near falls asleep in her chair, and while she nods, Mr. Carter, Clara's chin came up. I opened that cabinet because a woman sitting in a parlor she was invited into isn't a thief. She's a guest, and nobody watches a guest. And if she doesn't nod off, if she stays wide awake and watches you the whole evening, then I take a room, and I thank her kindly, and I come back the next Thursday, if there is a next Thursday. Clara's voice hardened, but there won't be, so she has to nod off. And that's where you come in, Mr. Carter. Because I can talk a lonely widow to sleep, but I can't be two places at once. And if Voss comes home early, if his luck turns and he quits the cards and starts back for Carey Street, somebody has to be watching that dark road to warn me before he reaches the door. That's your part. You watch the road. You give me the signal if he comes. And you pray to God I'm quick with a cabinet lock. Nathaniel was quiet a long moment. I don't like it, he said finally. You alone in a house with that book in it, and Voss may be a quarter-hour away. If he came home and found you, Clara, that man broke a boy's neck 2 nights ago and called it a fall. If he caught you, he won't catch me. She said it steadier than she felt. And it has to be me. You're too big to be harmless and too grim to chatter. And besides, your name's known in this city, and mine's not. It has to be the farmer's daughter nobody's ever heard of in the mended dress, who couldn't possibly be a danger to a soul. She reached out. She hardly knew she did it, and laid her hand flat against his chest over the heart she'd been cracking open a little more each day. I've been underestimated my whole life, Nathaniel Carter. By my betters, by the town, by you in that carriage 11 days ago. It's cost me plenty. But tonight, God willing, it's finally going to pay. He looked down at her hand on his chest, and he covered it with his own, and held it there. Come back to me, he said. Low, rough. Whatever else happens tonight, you come back through that door. Do you hear me, Clara? I've buried one woman. He stopped. His jaw worked. I'll not do it twice. Come back to me. Clara's heart turned over in her chest. I hear you, Mr. Carter, she said softly. I'll come back. I have a book to steal and a boy to avenge, and a father to see justice for. I've too much left to do to go and get myself killed over a parlor cabinet. She stepped back and squeezed his hand once before she let it go. 9 o'clock, watch the road. And Nathaniel, if you see Voss coming, don't you dare play the hero and try to stop him yourself. You signal, and you let me get out clean. A dead husband does me no good at all. A widow's a hard thing to argue with, he said, and it was nearly a smile, the ghost of one the first she'd ever seen try to reach his mouth. Then don't make me one, Clara said, and turned and went to make herself harmless. At 7, she knocked on Mrs. Cobb's door with her carpet bag in her hand, and her heart in her throat. And when the old woman opened it, small and stooped and squinting, an ear trumpet on a ribbon around her neck, Clara became in the space of a breath someone else entirely. Oh, thank the Lord, she said, breathless, pitching her voice loud and warm and weary all at once. Are you Mrs. Cobb? Please say you're Mrs. Cobb. I've walked half of Richmond asking after you. They told me down at the coach house, if a respectable young woman traveling alone wants a clean bed and Christian company, there's not a house in this city to match Mrs. Cobb's on Carey Street. And I've been that anxious to find it before dark. A girl alone in a strange city, you understand? Oh, it's frightening. I don't mind telling you. Slow down, child. Slow down. But the old woman was already smiling, already stepping back to let her in, already warmed by the flattery and the company. You'll do yourself an injury talking so fast. Come in. Come in. Out of the street. A room, is it? If you've one to spare. Oh, what a lovely hall. My mother would have wept to see a hall kept so fine. She passed this spring. Ma'am, God rest her. It's part of why I've come away. The house was so empty after. Clara let her voice catch just so, and watched the old widow's face soften clean through with fellow feeling, one lonely woman recognizing another. There now, Mrs. Cobb murmured, taking her arm. There now, you poor thing. Come and sit in the parlor, and I'll fetch us some tea, and you'll tell me all about it. A girl who's lost her mother oughtn't be standing in a cold hall. And just like that, Clara Whitmore was inside the house, and inside the parlor, and sitting not 6 feet from a walnut cabinet with a brass lock. And it had cost her nothing but a true story about a dead mother and a lonely one's kind heart. She hated herself a little, sitting in that warm parlor being kind to a good old woman she meant to rob. But she thought of Ezra Pauling with his neck broke at the bottom of a stair, and she thought of her father staring at a wall in a rented room, and she thought of a girl named Eleanor, 5 years in the ground with a doctor paid for his silence, and she set the hate aside. There would be time to be ashamed later. Tonight, there was only the book. She talked. Lord, how she talked. She told Mrs. Cobb about her mother and her village, and her long, sad journey. And half of it was true, and half she spun out of air, and the old woman drank it all in, nodding, patting her hand, glad past telling to have a young voice filling her lonely parlor of an evening. And all the while Clara's eyes went again and again to the little brass clock on the mantel, and to the cabinet in the corner, and once, when Mrs. Cobb bent to pour the tea, to the window where somewhere out in the dark across the road, Nathaniel Carter was watching the dock road and waiting. At 8:45, the old woman yawned. Oh, listen to me, Clara said at once. All contrition, keeping you up half the night with my chatter, and you an early-to-bed woman, I'll wager I can always tell. You go on and have your evening, Mrs. Cobb. Don't mind me. Might I just? Would it be a terrible imposition if I sat here in your lovely warm parlor a few minutes more? Only my room at the coach house is so cold and cheerless, and it's so kind and safe feeling here, and I've been that lonely on the road. Of course, child. Of course. Mrs. Cobb was already rising, already reaching for the bottle on the sideboard, already thinking of her toddy and her bed. You sit as long as you like. Bank the fire when you go. There's a good girl. And pull the door, too. I'll not hear you. Deaf as a post once I'm abed. It always have been. My Josiah used to say a cannon wouldn't wake me. She poured her toddy with a hand that shook a little, drank half of it standing, and shuffled toward the stairs. You come back tomorrow about that room, mind. I have a nice one on the 3rd floor. Southern light. We'll settle it in the morning. I'll be here first thing, Clara promised. Bless you, Mrs. Cobb. You've been a kindness to a lonely girl. My mother would have loved you. The old woman smiled, pleased, and climbed the stairs, and a door closed above. And after a while the house went still, and Clara Whitmore was alone in the parlor, with the book 6 feet away, and her own heart going like a hammer. She made herself wait. She counted to 500, slow, listening to the ceiling for any creak of the old woman moving about. Nothing. Then a sound came, faint, rhythmic, from above, and Clara nearly laughed aloud with the relief of it. Snoring, deep and even, and true, deaf as a post, and dead to the world. She crossed to the cabinet. The lock was a simple thing, brass, old. Clara had picked worse in her farming days, when a father, who kept his own accounts, sometimes lost his own keys, and she'd learned the trick of it from a horse trader who'd sworn her to secrecy. She drew a hairpin from her own hair, then a second, and knelt by the cabinet. Her hands, now remarkably steady and cold, went to work as the moment finally arrived. One pin held the tension steady, the other probed inside, feeling for the tumblers, one by one. Patiently, patiently, the lock yielded with a faint click that, in the silent parlor, sounded as loud as a gunshot. Clara froze, listening. The snoring from upstairs never wavered. She opened the cabinet. There it was, wedged between a stack of linens and a lacquered tea caddy, a strong box, iron-bound, and beside it, on a chain, a single, heavy key. Voss's strongbox and Voss's key, left in the care of a deaf old widow, precisely as a dead boy had foretold. Clara's breath hitched. She lifted the box, heavier than she'd expected, and set it on the parlor floor. She fitted the key, turned it, and raised the lid. Papers, a false bottom tray of ordinary receipts and letters, a decoy for any casual glance. Clara lifted the tray clean out and set it aside. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, was a book. She unwrapped it with trembling fingers. A ledger, plain bound, thick with the weight of years. She opened it to the middle, holding it to the fire's light. And there, in a cramped clerk's hand, page after page, was everything. The Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern, its true accounts. Parcels bought for a song and sold for a fortune. The Whitmore land, her father's land, listed by name and date, and the pitiful sum they'd paid for it. Carter land, Nathaniel's land, the creek bottom and the woodlot, and the Hensley tract, deeded away over a forged signature, and every dollar of profit, page after page, flowing to one place, one name written 100 times in that cramped, careful hand, to the account of William Carter, principal. Clara turned the pages toward the back, her heart in her mouth, searching for the one page a dead boy had warned her of, the oldest page, the one from the spring of 1811, and she found it. She read it once. Her hand flew to her mouth. Paid to Dr. J. Sue. The sum of $200 for attendance upon Miss E. Vance in her final illness, and for his continued discretion regarding the true nature of the same. And below it, in the same cramped hand, a second line that stopped Clara's heart dead in her chest. Materials for said attendance procured through the apothecary, Gill, per the principal's particular instruction. Account and a figure and a date and a word written plain, that no natural fever ever required a man to buy at an apothecary's counter. Arsenic. Clara knelt on the floor of a stranger's parlor, the proof of a murder in her two hands, and for a moment, she could not move at all. It was one thing to suspect. It was another thing entirely to hold it, to see it written down, cold and clerkly. A girl's life reduced to a line item, a poison bought, a doctor paid, and a 5-year grief manufactured on purpose by a man who then took the grieving nephew's hand and offered to carry the weight. "You monster," she whispered to the empty room. "You bought the poison, and you paid the doctor, and then you comforted him. For 5 years you sat with him, and you comforted him." A sound came from outside, sharp. 3 short raps against the parlor window, low, then a fourth. Nathaniel's signal. Clara's blood turned to ice water. 3 raps and a fourth. Voss. Voss was coming home. Voss's luck had turned, or his money had run out, and he was walking back up Carey Street toward the very house where a farmer's daughter knelt on his landlady's floor, with his murdering book open in her lap. She moved. She wrapped the ledger back in its oilcloth. No, she stopped, her mind racing, cold and clear, the way it did only in the worst moments. She could not simply take the book. If Voss came home tomorrow, or Friday, and found the strongbox light, found the ledger gone, he'd know that instant it was stolen, and he'd warn William, and the whole thing would collapse. She'd said it herself. A theft nobody knows is a theft. She needed the truth of what was in that book, but she needed Voss to go on believing it still lay safe in the cabinet. She had no time to copy it. Voss was in the street, but she had the page, the one page that mattered most. With hands that now shook badly, she took hold of the murder page at its spine and tore it free, clean and quiet. She folded it small and thrust it down the front of her dress, against her own hammering heart. Then she looked wildly at the rest. The land accounts, her father's ruin, Nathaniel's stolen deeds. Too many pages to tear. No time. No time. And she made a choice in half a second that would have to serve. She tore 3 more pages. The ones with the Whitmore land, and the Carter deeds, and William's name as principal. Ripped largest, folded them with the first, and hid them all against her body. Then she wrapped what was left of the ledger back in its oilcloth, set it in the strongbox, laid the false tray of papers over it, closed the lid, turned the key, and lifted the whole box back into the cabinet. Between the linens and the tea caddy, exactly as she'd found it. A man opening the box in a hurry would see the oilcloth bundle and the papers and think all was well. Only a man who sat and read every page would find the gaps where 4 sheets had been. And Voss did not read the book. Voss only guarded it. Ezra had said so. She shut the cabinet. She fitted the pins to the lock and turned it home. And the little click as it caught was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. She swept the hairpin back into her hair. She banked the fire, as a lodger would, as Mrs. Cobb had bid her. And she was reaching for her carpet bag, 3 steps from being clean away, when she heard a key scrape in the front lock, and a man's heavy tread come into the hall. Clara Whitmore stood alone in a murderer's parlor, with the proof of his crimes hidden against her heart, and Harlan Voss came home a full hour early, and there was nowhere left to run. She had 1 instant, and in it, she did not freeze, because a lifetime of being underestimated had taught her that the moment they expect you to freeze is the moment you smile. She snatched up her cup of long cold tea, sank into the chair by the banked fire, arranged her face into weary, harmless sorrow, and when Harlan Voss shoved open the parlor door, a scowl on his lean, gray, ordinary-looking face with a killer's flat eyes, he found not a thief, but a red-eyed young woman sniffling into a teacup by the coals. Voss stopped dead. "Who in blazes are you?" "Oh!" Clara startled up, spilling the cold tea, all flustered mortification. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't. Mrs. Cobb said I might sit a while. I have a room to let with her come morning, and my lodgings are so cold and I've disturbed you. I'm so sorry." "Is this your parlor?" She never said, I'll go directly. She was up, gathering her bag, wiping her eyes, a picture of harmless female fluster so complete that Voss's flat, suspicious stare wavered in spite of itself. "Cobb let you sit here," he said flatly. "In the parlor alone?" She was so kind about it. "I'd lost my mother, you see, and I was that lonely." And she said, "The fire. Oh, but I've overstayed shamefully. Look at the hour. Please forgive me, sir. I'll be gone this instant, and I'll not trouble the house again till morning." Clara bobbed a frightened little curtsy and made for the door, and she had to pass within a foot of him to reach it, close enough to smell the whiskey and smoke on him, close enough that the 4 stolen pages against her heart seemed to burn like a brand, and she kept her eyes down and her step quick, and her whole body soft and harmless, and beneath notice. Voss let her pass. His eyes followed her. She felt them, but he let her pass because she was nothing. A chattering girl, a lonely nobody in a mended dress, exactly what she'd made herself, exactly what the world had always taken her for. She was at the front door. Her hand was on the latch. Clara's heart stopped. She turned, slow, mild. Sir Harlan Voss stood in the parlor doorway, and his flat gray eyes had gone to the corner cabinet, to the walnut cabinet with the brass lock. And Clara understood in a rush of pure animal terror that he was about to cross the room and open it, that he checked it every night he came home, that in 10 seconds he would have the strongbox out and the lid up, and even a man who didn't read the book would see the fresh torn edges if he so much as riffled the pages, and it was over. It was all over. A boy had died for nothing, and her father would never see justice, and she would never come back through the door to a man who'd begged her to. "You seen anybody about tonight?" Voss said. "Strangers, men hanging about the street, anybody watching the house?" Clara nearly wept with the relief of it. He wasn't thinking of the book. He was thinking of the thing his own guilty conscience feared, that someone was coming for him, that the walls were closing in, that a boy's murder 2 nights gone had loosed something he couldn't call back. "Why, no, sir," she said, and let her eyes go wide and worried, and gave him, God forgive her, one last gift of her harmlessness. "No one at all. Though," she hesitated, as if uncertain whether to say it. "There was a man down the far end of the street in the dark when I came, just standing. It gave me a fright, a woman alone, but he never moved, and I hurried on past. Likely nothing. A husband waiting on a wife, I told myself." She watched the alarm leap into Voss's flat eyes, watched his head turn toward the window and the dark street beyond, watched every scrap of his attention pull away from the cabinet and out toward the road where he now believed some watcher stood. Should I be frightened, sir? Is the street not safe? Get to your lodgings," Voss said tightly, already moving to the window, already peering out into the dark, the cabinet forgotten. "Go on. Get. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night. And Clara Whitmore opened the door and walked out into the summer dark, down the steps, along Carey Street, at a lonely girl's unhurried, frightened pace, until she rounded the corner out of sight of the house. And then she ran full out. One hand pressed flat to her chest to hold 4 folded pages against her hammering heart, until a shape peeled away from a doorway ahead of her and caught her hard against him. And it was Nathaniel. It was Nathaniel with his arms around her, and his heart going as wild as her own. "You're out," he breathed into her hair. "God Almighty, you're out." I saw him turn up the street and I could do nothing but knock the glass and pray. "Clara, I've never been—" He broke off. I thought, I have it. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and her whole face was alight with something fierce and terrible and triumphant. "Nathaniel, I have it. Not the whole book. I left. The book he thinks it's safe. He doesn't know, but I have the pages, the land. Your uncle's name as principal. My father's ruin in his own clerk's hand." Her voice dropped and shook, and the triumph in it cracked open into something raw. "And the other one, the one that boy died for. I have that too, against my heart right now." She pressed her hand harder to her chest. "It's real, Nathaniel. It was never a fever. He bought arsenic from an apothecary named Gill, and he paid a doctor named Sue $200 for his silence. And it's written down in a murdering man's own account book. And I have it." Tears spilled down her face, of grief and rage and horror and vindication, all at once. "Your uncle murdered Eleanor. He poisoned her to break you, so he could take your fortune while you grieved. And I can prove it. I can prove every word of it. We can hang him." Nathaniel Carter stood in the dark Richmond street and held his wife against him, and Clara felt the great shudder go through his whole body as the last of the ice broke and fell away. 5 years of manufactured grief. 5 years of a stranger's calculated destruction. 5 years of accepting solace from the very blood that had orchestrated the death of a girl to inflict such pain. He didn't weep. He'd moved beyond tears to a stillness far more potent, far more perilous. "Then we go home," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper against her hair. "We go home, and we build a case that's watertight, and we don't budge until it's a noose. He can't escape. Not for the land, not for your father, though God knows he'll have to answer for that too." He drew back, his gaze falling upon her. In the dim light, his eyes were sharp, clear, and terrifying. "For Eleanor," he declared. "For that boy Ezra. For every soul he's devoured to line his own pockets." His hand rose, gently cupping her cheek, a stark contrast to the iron resolve that had hardened him. "You walked into a murderer's house tonight with 2 hairpins and a sob story, Clara Whitmore, and you walked out with the very thing that will hang him. There's not a living soul I would have trusted with this but you." Clara leaned into his touch for a fleeting moment, just long enough to feel the solid warmth of his hand in the darkness, her heart pressed against the weight of a killer's crimes. "Then let's go home, Mr. Carter," she whispered. "We have a monster to hang, a father to free, and a promise to keep to a poor dead boy." She stepped back, straightened her shoulders, and wiped her face with the back of her steady hand, erasing the tracks of tears. "And when it's done, when every last bit of it is done," she met his gaze, allowing him to see, for the first time, the resolve she had carefully shielded, just as he had guarded his own heart. "You can say that thing to me again, the thing from the carriage, on solid ground, like you promised, and I reckon I'll be ready to believe it." They rode home through the night, foregoing the wait for dawn, for neither could have slept in Richmond with a killer a quarter-mile away, and 4 torn pages burning against Clara's heart. And on that long, dark road, with the horses moving at an easy pace, and the stolen truth tucked safely within an oilcloth pouch from Nathaniel's own coat, they began, quietly, to forge the instrument of William Carter's downfall. 4 pages won't be enough," Clara said. She'd been turning the problem over and over during the entire ride, and the more she considered it, the clearer the difficulty became. "I know that's a hard thing to hear after tonight, Nathaniel, but I won't lie to you, and I won't let us walk into a courtroom half-armed. 4 torn pages, hidden inside a woman's dress, taken from a house I entered under a false name. A skilled defense lawyer would shred them. They'd claim we forged them ourselves. They'd say a jilted farmer's daughter and a nephew, eager for his uncle's downfall, concocted 4 sheets of paper between them. They'd ask why, if the crimes were real, we didn't take the whole book. They'd ask how a lady came by them, and I'd have to admit that I picked a lock, deceived a widow, and robbed a boarding house. And there goes my character, and there goes the case. Nathaniel was silent for a moment, and she watched him absorb it, not with his usual cold detachment, but with the clear, sharp calculation of a man learning to fight as she did. Then the pages aren't the weapon, he said slowly. They're the map. They tell us where to dig, but the case has to be built from things a court can't dismiss. Living witnesses, actual documents, men willing to swear to it under oath. Now you're thinking like a thief catcher instead of a thief's victim. Clara nodded in the darkness. The pages give us 3 avenues. The apothecary who sold the arsenic, the doctor who accepted $200 for his silence, and the land, your deeds, my father's deeds, sold to a company we can now prove your uncle owns. She counted them on her fingers, though he couldn't see. If even one of those 3 men can be persuaded to talk, if Jill will attest that he sold poison to Voss on William's order, or if Sewell will confess what he was paid to conceal, then the pages cease to be the entire case and become the confirmation of an honest man's testimony. That's how you hang him, Nathaniel. Not with paper alone, with paper and a living voice, each supporting the other so neither can be toppled individually. Sue, Nathaniel mused, the doctor, he's the one who would know the whole truth of it. If Eleanor was poisoned, he tended her. He witnessed it. He signed the death certificate, calling it fever. He's carried that burden for 5 years. His jaw tightened. A man carries something like that. 5 years, Clara. It consumes him. You said it yourself about that boy. Some men can't be bought into silence forever. The guilt begins to cost more than the money received. Then Sue is our first lead, Clara agreed. Nathaniel hesitated, then carefully added, whatever gnaws at that doctor, he's still the man who took the money and signed the lie. He's not the frightened, honorable boy Ezra was. He's a grown man who chose his silence, with his eyes wide open for 5 years. We can't walk in and take his hand and call him a good man. We have to make him more afraid of us than he is of your uncle. We have to make him understand that the walls are already crumbling, that the books are practically ours, that his only remaining path is to turn state's witness before your uncle does to him what he did to that boy on the stairs. Nathaniel turned to look at her in the darkness. You think William would kill the doctor too? I think William Carter has killed a woman and a boy that we know of, Clara said quietly. And a man who has killed twice has stopped counting. The moment your uncle suspects Sewell might talk, Sue will die from a fall downstairs, just like Ezra. Which means, Nathaniel, her voice lowered, the urgency in it filling the dark carriage. We have to reach that doctor before your uncle learns we're even close to him. Everything we do now, we do quietly, and we do quickly, because the man we're hunting is hunting too. And he's been far better at it than us for 5 long years. Chapter 8. They arrived back at Carter Manor near dawn, where Mrs. Abbott met them at the door, her face ashen with a fresh wave of worry. For trouble no longer merely knocked at that house. It had moved in and made itself at home. He's been here again, she said, before they'd even stepped fully inside. Your uncle, yesterday and the day before, twice, asking after both of you, where you'd gone, when you'd be back, what business took you away so suddenly. Her gnarled hands twisted her apron. I told him you'd gone to see Mrs. Carter's ailing father in Lynchburg, like you instructed me to say. But he didn't like it, Master Carter. He stood in that hall and looked at me for a long time, and then he said, she swallowed, he said, Richmond's a fair piece past Lynchburg, Abbott. See, the boy remembers which town his wife's father resides in. She looked from one to the other. He knows you were in Richmond, sir, same as before. I don't know how, but he knows. Clara and Nathaniel exchanged a glance. He has men watching us, Clara stated. Or the roads, or both. He's had 5 years and a stolen fortune to buy eyes all over this country, Nathaniel. She turned to Mrs. Abbott. What did he want beyond frightening you? A man like that doesn't ride out twice just to inquire about our travels. What did he truly come for? The old woman's face crumpled. Money, she whispered. He came to sell the last of the good horses, said the estate was in debt on notes that had come due, and there was nothing for it but to sell the livestock. He had papers, Master Carter, and men with a lead line, and I stood in the doorway, and I told him, "You left strict instructions. Nothing was to leave this land while you were gone." And he, her voice broke, he struck me, sir, a backhand across the face. The first time in 20 years, any Carter has raised a hand to me, and the warmth went out of him again. That same coldness I told you of. And he said, "You'll learn who runs this family before we're through, old woman." And he took the horses anyway, 4 of them, the bays your father raised. Nathaniel went utterly still. Clara saw his hand slowly clench into a fist, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, and she stepped close, laying her hand over his clenched fist, before the rage within him could find an outlet. "He struck you," Nathaniel said, his voice low and terrible. "He rode onto my land and struck a woman who has kept my house for 20 years. Nathaniel," Clara pressed his fist, I know, and he will answer for it, for that and all the rest. Every last bit of it, I swear to you, but not now. Not by riding after him in a fury, which is precisely what he wants." She turned his face towards her with her free hand. "Don't you see what he's doing? He's provoking you. He struck her to provoke you. He wants you angry. He wants you to come charging after him like your father would have, like my father did. Straight on with the truth in your fist. Because a man in a rage makes mistakes, and a man who makes mistakes is easy to ruin. He's baiting the hook, Nathaniel. Don't take it. The angrier he makes you, the calmer we must be." But Nathaniel drew a breath. She watched him fight it down, watched him choose her cool, clear path over his own fiery one. And it was the hardest thing she had yet seen him do. And when he had done it, something settled within him that had not been there before. A patience, a killer's patience of his own. "Mrs. Abbott," he said, his voice now quiet and even, "I am more sorry than words can express that he laid a hand on you. That is a debt I intend to see paid in full, and soon. But I need you to be brave a while longer, and I need you to continue saying exactly what you've said. Lynchburg, her ailing father, nothing more. Can you do that?" "I can, sir." The old woman drew herself up. "For 20 years I've kept this family's secrets. I can keep a few more days' worth, and gladly, to see that man hang." "Then keep them," Nathaniel said, "because we are going to hang him, Mrs. Abbott. My wife has seen to that. All that remains is the how and the when, and neither of those belongs to William Carter anymore. They belong to us." Dr. Josiah Sue maintained a modest practice in a town a half-day's ride to the south, and Clara and Nathaniel found him on the second afternoon in his small back room, where he mixed his tinctures. He was a stooped man, nearing 60, gray and pale-faced, with a tremor in his hands that Clara noticed at once and understood. "That shake in your hands, doctor," she said before Nathaniel could speak, before any introduction had been made. "How long have you had it?" The old doctor looked up, startled by the young woman who had walked into his back room and asked such a question. "I beg your pardon. Who are you?" "It started about 5 years ago, I'd guess," Clara continued, gentle yet relentless. "It began sometime in the spring of 1811, I'd wager, and it's never quite left. And there are mornings you can't hold a spoon steady, and you tell yourself it's age, but you know it isn't age, doctor, do you? You know exactly what it is, and exactly when it started." Sewell had gone white. He carefully set down the pestle he had been holding, as if afraid of dropping it. "Who are you?" he whispered again. But there was no demand left in his voice now, only dread. "My name is Clara Carter," she said, "and this is my husband, Nathaniel Carter. And I believe, doctor, that you knew a young woman named Eleanor Vance in the spring of 1811. I believe you attended her final illness, and I believe you haven't held a spoon steady since the day you signed the paper that declared her death a fever." She stepped closer, her voice remaining soft as the voice she had used with the boy, Ezra, but now it was threaded with iron. "I believe you've carried her for 5 years, doctor. I believe she visits you, and I believe I truly believe that some part of you has been waiting all this time for someone to walk through that door and finally make you say it out loud. The old doctor's mouth worked. No sound emerged. His eyes flickered from Clara's face to Nathaniel's. To Nathaniel, who stood silent and formidable in the doorway. The very embodiment of the grief the doctor had helped to create. And something within Josiah Sue, something that had been held captive for 5 long years, simply gave way. "You're him," he croaked, staring at Nathaniel. "You're the nephew, the one who—" His voice cracked. "God help me. God forgive me. I've prayed you'd come. I've prayed you'd never come. Both at once, every day, for 5 years. He sank onto a stool as if his legs had given out. "How much do you know?" "We know she was poisoned," Nathaniel said. It was the first time he'd spoken, his voice low, steady, and awful. "We know it was arsenic. We know it was bought from an apothecary named Gill, on William Carter's instruction. And we know you were paid $200 to call it a fever and hold your tongue." He took a step into the room. "What we don't know, doctor, is whether you'll die a man who murdered a girl for money, or a man who found his courage 5 years too late, but found it at last. That's the only thing left for you to decide, and you're going to decide it today." Sue put his face in his shaking hands. "I didn't poison her." The words were muffled, wretched. "You have to believe that much, at least. I never gave her a thing. But I—" He looked up, his gray face wet. "I saw it. I saw what it was. A doctor of 20 years' practice. You think I didn't know arsenic when I saw it? The vomiting, the burning, the way she—" He stopped, shuddering. "Her family thought fever. Her poor mother sat by that bed and thought her girl was dying of a summer fever. And I stood there and I knew. And I said nothing, because 2 days before, William Carter had come to me in the night and put $200 on my table and told me that a wise physician sometimes finds it prudent to call a thing by a gentler name than the truth. And when I understood what he was asking, when I understood what was already being done to that girl in that house, I was afraid. God help me. I was a coward, and I was afraid, and I took the money, and I signed the paper, and I have not held a spoon steady since." He wept openly now, an old man's terrible weeping. "I've wanted to die every day for 5 years. I've wanted someone to come and drag it out of me. I couldn't say it myself. I hadn't the courage, even for that. But if you've come to make me say it, then thank God. Thank God. I'll say it. I'll say all of it, to anyone, to a court, to the whole world. And I'll hang beside him if I must. And it'll be a mercy, because at least then, it'll finally be out of me." Clara knelt down in front of the broken old man and took his shaking hands in both of hers, the same gesture she'd given the boy. But there was no gentleness of forgiveness in it now, only the firm grip of one soul holding another upright long enough to do a hard thing. "You'll not hang, doctor," she said quietly. "A man who confesses and turns witness doesn't hang. But you'll do the hard thing. You'll swear it all out in writing before a magistrate today. If we can manage it, everything William Carter said to you, the money, the paper, what you saw in that room, and you'll name the apothecary Gill, so we can bring him in too, before William learns any of us have been to see you." Her grip tightened. "Because here's the truth. You have to hold on to Dr. Sewell. And it's a hard one. The moment William Carter suspects you might talk, you're a dead man. He killed Eleanor. He killed a clerk named Ezra Pauling in Richmond 3 nights ago, and called it a fall down a stair. You are the single most dangerous witness alive to him, and you have been for 5 years. And the only reason you've lived this long is that he believed his money had you bought forever. The day he doubts that is the day you die." She held his eyes. "So we do this fast. We do this today. We get your confession sworn and copied and into safe hands, where killing you can't unmake it. Do you understand me? Your life now depends on how quickly you find your courage, so find it fast." The old doctor looked into her fierce, steady eyes, and he gripped her hands back, and for the first time in 5 years, Josiah Sue nodded like a man, instead of flinching like a whipped dog. "Today," he said. "Yes, today. Before I lose my nerve, get me a magistrate and a Bible, and I'll swear it till my hand falls off." He drew a ragged breath. "And Gill, the apothecary, you'll want to move on him tonight, before word travels. Gill's a weak, greedy little man. He sold the poison knowing full well, and he's lived fat on Carter money ever since. And he'll fold the moment he sees the walls are down, but he'll also run to William the moment he smells danger. So you take him quiet, and you take him quick. He wiped his face. I can tell you where his shop is. I can tell you the poison was entered in his own poison register. The law requires it. Every apothecary keeps one. There will be an entry, a sale of arsenic dated, signed for by Voss, but bought for Carter. It's the law. He couldn't have left it out without breaking the very statute that would hang him. It's there, in Gil's own book, in his own hand. You've only to make him show it, before he thinks to burn the page. Clara looked up at Nathaniel, and a fierce, bright understanding passed between them. A second book, a second register kept by law, with the poison sale written in it, plain. Not 4 torn pages hidden in a lady's dress that a lawyer could call a forgery, but a lawful poison register kept under statute, that any magistrate would know at a glance no one had forged. That's it, Clara breathed. That's the thing that can't be waved off, Nathaniel. That's the living second voice to prop up the paper, the doctor's sworn confession, and the apothecary's lawful register, and 4 pages from Voss's book underneath them. Both 3 separate hands, 3 separate crimes, all pointing at one man. She rose to her feet. A lawyer can call one of them a lie. He can't call all 3 a lie without calling the law itself a liar. She turned to Sue. Doctor, the magistrate, the nearest honest one, not one your Williams bought. Do you know such a man? Judge Alden, Sue said. 2 towns east, an honest man and no friend to the Carters. William cheated his brother in a land deal years back, and Alden's never forgotten it. He'll not be bought, and he'll not be frightened, and he'll move fast if the case is sound. The old doctor got to his feet, and though his hands still shook, something in his stooped back had straightened. Take me to Alden. I'll swear it out. And then, by God, take that apothecary before nightfall, and let's finish this thing that should have been finished 5 years ago. Yakimar, it moved fast after that, faster than Clara had dared hope, and faster than William Carter, for all his eyes on the roads could track. They took Josiah Sewell to Judge Alden that same afternoon, and the old doctor swore out his confession before the magistrate in a firm, ruined voice. Every word of it, the money and the poison, and the 5 years of silence. And Alden, a lean, hard old man with no love for the Carter name, listened to the whole of it, with a face gone grimmer by the minute, and when it was done, he had it copied out twice by his own clerk and sealed. 1 copy locked in his own strongbox, and 1 dispatched by trusted rider to the county seat, so that no killing of doctor or judge could now unmake what had been sworn. That's the doctor safe, Alden said when it was done. A confession sworn and copied and lodged 2 places can't be undone by a knife in the dark. He turned his hard eyes on Nathaniel and Clara. Sue, you'll stay under my roof tonight, and every night till the trial. I've men enough to keep you breathing. Now, the apothecary. If what the doctor says is true, if there's a lawful poison register with that sale entered, then that's the linchpin of the whole business, and your uncle's finished. But a register can be burned, and a greedy apothecary can be frightened into running, or into your uncle's arms. So, you'll want the law with you when you take him, and you'll want it tonight, before this doctor's absence from his own surgery starts folk talking. He rose. I'll send my constable and a warrant. You'll have the law at your back, Mr. Carter. See it's done clean. They rode on Gil's shop that same night, Nathaniel and Clara and the judge's constable, with a lawful warrant in his coat, and it went almost exactly as the doctor had foretold. Gil was a soft, round, frightened little man, and the sight of a constable and a warrant in his doorway near stopped his heart. He blustered. He denied. He said he kept no such register. And then, when the constable read him the statute and the penalty for an apothecary who failed to keep one, he changed his tune and said, perhaps he did keep one, but it was lost. And then, when Nathaniel took 1 slow step toward him, it all came apart at once. He made me, Gil squealed, backing into his own shelves, so the bottles rang. William Carter. It was him, not me. I only sold what I was licensed to sell. How was I to know what he meant to do with it? He came with Voss, and he paid triple, and he said no questions, and a man's got to eat. I have a family. He was scrabbling now, digging under his own counter, and he came up with a book, a plain ledger, the poison register the law required, and he thrust it at the constable as if it were on fire. There, you see, I kept it lawful. I entered it same as the statute says. Arsenic, 3 ounces sold to H. Voss on account of W. Carter, dated the 9th of May, 1811. I did everything by the law, I did. It's not my crime. I only sold it. You only sold the poison that killed a girl, Nathaniel said quietly, and lived fat on the killer's gratitude for 5 years. Save your speeches for the court, Mr. Gill. You'll have need of them. Clara took the register from the constable's hands with a kind of reverence, and turned to the entry and read it and closed her eyes. There it was, dated, signed, lawful. The 9th of May, 1811, 2 days before Eleanor Vance began to die of what a bought doctor called a fever. 3 ounces of arsenic sold to Voss on account of William Carter. Written in an apothecary's own hand, in the very register the law compelled him to keep, and never once thought to destroy because for 5 years he'd believed himself untouchable. We have him, she said, very low, to Nathaniel, as the constable clapped irons on the blubbering apothecary. The doctor's sworn confession, the poison register in a lawful hand, Voss's own 4 pages naming your uncle principal. 3 hands, Nathaniel. 3 separate men. 3 separate crimes. And every road runs to the same door. She opened her eyes, and they were wet and blazing at once. It's done. He can't slip it. There's no lie big enough to swallow all 3. William Carter is going to hang for what he did to Eleanor, and to my father, and to that boy on the stairs, and there's not a thing on this earth he can do to stop it now. But even as she said it, even as the words left her mouth, the constable's face changed, and he turned toward the shop door, and Clara heard it too. Horses, many horses, hard-ridden, coming up the dark street fast, and men's voices, and the particular sound a group of armed men makes when they mean business, and her blood ran cold. Because a man who had eyes on every road might well have eyes on an apothecary too. That's not the judge's men, the constable said grimly, drawing his pistol. The judge's men are back at Alden's guarding the doctor. Whoever that is. The shop door slammed open, and William Carter walked in out of the dark with 4 hard men at his back, and the warmth was clean gone from his face, all of it, forever. And what stood in its place was the true man underneath 20 years of smiling, cold, and gray and murderous. A man who had killed a girl and a boy, and would kill again without a flicker, and who had finally, run out of patience with the nephew he'd bled for 5 long years. Well, William Carter said, in a voice like a grave being dug. His flat eyes went from the constable's pistol, to the apothecary and irons, to the register in Clara's hands. And Clara watched him understand in one cold instant exactly how much they had, and exactly how finished he was, and exactly how little he had left to lose. It seems, he said softly, my nephew has been busy, and his little farm-bred wife, busier still. His gaze landed on Clara, the register clutched to her chest, and an icy stillness seized her. You've cost me dearly, girl, he murmured, a chilling amusement lacing his tone. More than you can possibly imagine. But you've made a grave miscalculation tonight, venturing into a lonely shop on a dark road with only 1 constable, and no inkling that I've had a man watching this apothecary for 5 years, precisely for this night. He offered a smile, not the gentle one, but the other, the genuine one. It was the most terrifying sight Clara had ever witnessed on a human face. You should have remained a nobody, Mrs. Carter. Nobody lives longer. Nathaniel Carter stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the 4 armed men, and the uncle he'd once thanked for his kindness. His voice, when it came, was quiet and steady, devoid of fear. You will not touch her, uncle, he stated. You will not touch any of us, because you've made the one mistake tonight that even you cannot buy your way out of. He remained still, no weapon drawn, simply standing tall and terrible, yet calm, shielding Clara with his own body. The doctor's confession is sworn, sealed, and has been dispatched to the county seat, an hour's hard ride from here, in Judge Alden's own hand. Kill every soul in this room, and it changes nothing. It's already beyond your reach, beyond your knife, already lodged where no fall down a stair can touch it. It's done, William. It was done before you rode up. You've come all this way to murder us over something that is already past saving. Nathaniel's eyes held his uncle's, unblinking. The only question left is whether you hang for one girl, or for a shop full of witnesses, too. And I don't believe, he said it softly, with absolute certainty, I don't believe even you are far enough gone to swing for nothing. Are you, Uncle, now that the money's already lost? The shop fell into a deathly silence. Clara's heart pounded against the poison register she clutched. The four burly men turned to William. The constable's pistol remained unwavering, and William Carter stood in the doorway of the poison seller's shop, his 5-year murder plot finally unraveling around him. Clara watched the terrible, cold calculation flicker behind his flat gray eyes. She watched him weigh the cost of killing them all against a confession already fled beyond his grasp. She watched him finally understand that there was no profit left in murder, because the fortune was already gone, and the noose already woven. And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune and found a war, who had picked a lock and lied to a widow, and knelt before a broken doctor, now stood behind the shielding body of a man who, 11 days prior, had told her never to speak. Clara stepped out from behind her husband, standing at his side instead of in his shadow, and looked William Carter directly in his murdering eyes. "You were right about one thing, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "I should have stayed a nobody. Nobodies do live longer." She lifted the register, letting the lamplight catch its surface. "But I stopped being a nobody the day your family took my father's land, and the day your poison took that girl, and the day your hands broke a good boy's neck on a Richmond stair. You made me a somebody, William Carter. You and your kind. You spent 30 years making somebodies out of every nobody you ever robbed, and you never once stopped to wonder what would happen the day one of us learned to count." She took a breath. "It's over. Not because we're strong and you're weak. You've got 4 armed men, and we've got 1 constable, and we both know how that math works out. It's over, because the truth has already gone past where you can reach it. You can kill us all, and it won't buy you back a single hour. So, call off your men, and take what's coming to you like the last shred of a man you might still be, or gun down a shop full of witnesses and hang twice over. Either way, you lose. For the first time in your whole long thieving life, William Carter, there is no bargain left for you to make." For a long, terrible moment, no one in the shop moved. The entire scene hung precariously on a knife's edge. 1 constable, 1 pistol, 4 hard men, and a murderer weighing his last terrible options. And it was one of William's own men who broke the spell. The nearest of them, a gaunt fellow with a scar bisecting his lip, looked from the register in Clara's hands to the irons on the apothecary, to the calm, shielding presence of Nathaniel Carter, and Clara watched him perform the same calculation she had laid bare. A confession already fled, a fortune already lost, a hanging awaiting him whether he fired or not. And she watched him decide he would not swing for a man who had just been plainly told there was no money left to pay him. "I never signed on for murder," the man said, his voice low, and he took a step back towards the door. "Land dealings. Mr. Carter, rough work, I'll grant you that, but not a shop full of witnesses with a constable standing in it. Not for a man whose accounts just went to the county seat." He glanced at the other 3. "Nor should you. There's no wage coming from a dead man's purse, and that was all it took." The moment one of them voiced what all 4 were thinking, the carefully constructed edifice William Carter had maintained for 30 years through money and fear crumbled in his hands, because money and fear were the only foundations it had ever possessed, and both had run dry in a single night. One by one the hard men stepped back, and the pistols that might have been drawn remained sheathed. William Carter stood alone in the doorway, his army vanished, leaving only a lean, gray murderer whose entire reign had rested, it turned out, on nothing but other men's belief that crossing him cost more than it paid. The constable moved then, swift and sure, leveling his pistol directly at William's chest. "William Carter," he said, his voice firm, "by warrant of Judge Alden, you are under arrest for the willful murder of Eleanor Vance, and we'll be adding the boy in Richmond, and God knows what else before the week's out. Put out your hands." William did not comply. He stood there, his flat gray eyes sweeping slowly around the room. They fell upon the apothecary, blubbering in his irons, upon the register in Clara's grip, upon the men who had abandoned him, and finally, upon Nathaniel, the nephew he had bled for 5 years. And something flickered across that cold face that Clara had not anticipated. Not fear, not remorse, but something worse. A profound bewilderment. The honest confusion of a man who, even now, even at the end, could not comprehend what he had done wrong. "I gave you a fortune," William said to Nathaniel, his voice suddenly strange, almost plaintive. "Do you understand that, boy? Your father would have run this estate into the ground inside a decade. Soft and sentimental, always paying his hands too much, and his debts too slow. I made this family what it was. I made hard choices your father hadn't the stomach for. And you," his lip curled, "you'd hand it all back over a farm girl and a dead woman, 5 years cold. You were always your father's son, weak, grateful for scraps." "Eleanor," Nathaniel said quietly, "was not a scrap." "Eleanor was a problem." William's voice cracked, the true rot finally showing through. "She'd have made you soft, the same way your mother made your father soft. She'd have filled that house with children and charity, and given the purse to every beggar in the county. I saw what she was doing to you. You were already going soft with love for her, already talking of freeing hands and forgiving debts. And I had 30 years and a fortune in this family. And I was not about to watch a sweet-faced girl undo it all in a season." He spoke plainly, terribly, as if stating an undeniable truth. "So, I made a hard choice, the way I always made the hard choices. And you grieved, and I ran the estate the way it should be run, and it would have gone on fine. It would have gone on fine forever, if you hadn't gone and married another one just like her." And there it was, the whole black heart of it confessed aloud in a poison seller's shop, before a constable and 4 witnesses, not trapped by any clever stratagem, but simply spilled because a man so far gone could not, in the end, resist explaining why his monstrousness had been nothing but sense all along. Clara heard the constable draw a sharp breath. She heard the apothecary fall silent. She heard, beside her, the terrible stillness of a man learning the exact shape of the thing that had murdered the woman he loved and stolen 5 years of his life. "You killed her," Nathaniel said, "because she was making me kind." "I killed her," William declared, "because kind men lose fortunes. And now you'll lose yours, boy, and prove me right in the losing." He offered his true smile one last time. "Enjoy your farm, girl. Enjoy your honest poverty when you're ruined and soft and your hands have all wandered off to better wages. Remember your Uncle William, who understood the world as it is, and not as weak men wish it were." "I'll remember you," Nathaniel said. "I'll remember you swinging from a rope, Uncle. And then I'll go home and free every hand you ever frightened and forgive every debt you ever forged. And I'll fill that house with exactly the children and charity you murdered a woman to prevent. And it'll thrive, William. That's the part you never understood in 30 years, and never will. Kindness didn't ruin this family. You did. And a kind house is going to outlast your grave by 100 years." He turned his back on his uncle, the deepest insult one man can offer another, and simply walked away. He looked instead at the constable. "Take him. I don't care to look at him anymore." They led William Carter out into the darkness, manacled, and he did not struggle, and he did not speak again. The last Clara saw of his face was a look of a man who, at the very end, had finally begun to suspect he might have been wrong about everything, and could not bear the thought. He turned his eyes away from it, and went to his cell, still clutching the only thing he had ever possessed, the certainty that everyone softer than himself was a fool. The trial came that autumn, and it was the largest event the county had seen in a generation. People rode in from 3 counties over to pack the courthouse and the surrounding yard, for word had spread of what the wealthy, cold Carter had married, and of the farm girl who had brought down the man who ruined half the valley. The case was precisely as airtight as Clara had meticulously constructed it. Dr. Sue took the stand, swearing out the entire confession in a firm, broken voice. The money, the poison, the 5 years of silence. He wept once and did not look away. Gill, the apothecary, in irons, produced his lawful poison register. The sale entered in his own hand, dated 2 days before Eleanor Vance began to die. No lawyer alive could call a statutory register a forgery. And when the 4 torn pages from Voss's own account book were laid beside the confession and the register, naming William Carter the principal, detailing the land accounts, his father's ruin, and Nathaniel's stolen deeds, all in one thieving hand, the picture was complete. 3 separate men and 3 separate crimes, every road leading to a single door, exactly as Clara had promised on a dark carriage road a lifetime ago. Voss turned state's witness to save his own neck, implicating the rest. The Richmond clerk on the stairs, the entire machinery of the Piedmont Land and Improvement Company, 30 years of forged debts and ruined families. And William Carter sat through it all with a face like gray stone, offering no defense that carried any weight, because there was none to offer. When the jury returned, it took them less than an hour. They hanged William Carter on a cold, bright morning, and Clara did not go to watch, nor did Nathaniel. "I told him I'd remember him swinging," Nathaniel said. "And I will, but I don't need to see it to remember it. I have better things to fill my eyes with now." And they stayed home that morning, the 2 of them. And when the church bell chimed the hour, they knew it was done. They stood together in the hall of the house, which no longer felt like a tomb. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Clara whispered, "It's over." Nathaniel corrected her gently. "No, it's finished. There's a difference. Over means something has stopped. Finished means something has been made whole." Clara considered his words and found them to be true. Her father returned that same autumn. They brought him home from a rented room in Lynchburg. The court ordered the stolen Whitmore land restored, acre for acre and more, with damages levied from William Carter's forfeited estate. But it wasn't the land that undid Clara when the wagon trundled up the long oak lane. It was her father's face at the window, thin and gray, aged beyond his years. She saw the hollowness she'd watched the ruin carve into him for 2 years, and the way that face transformed when he saw her running toward him. Something returned to his eyes that she'd thought lost forever. "Papa," she choked out, her hands clasped in his before the wagon had fully stopped. The same hands she'd watched grow small and fearful during the bad years. "Papa, it's yours again. All of it, the land, the name, everything they took. I got it back. I got it all back." Her father looked at her, then past her to the grand, pale house, and then to the tall, grave man descending the steps behind her. His eyes filled. "You got it back," he repeated, bewildered. "Clara, girl, I lost it. I lost everything your grandfather built, and everything I promised your mother. I sat in that room for 2 years thinking I'd failed you, beyond any mending." His voice broke. "You got it back. How? How does a girl who I couldn't even give a proper dowry to bring down a man who beat men twice her strength?" "By counting, Papa," Clara said, laughing and crying at once. "You taught me to count. You sat me down when I was 11 and taught me to keep a ledger. You thought you were teaching me to run a farm, but what you were really teaching me," she pressed his hands, "was how to catch a thief. Everything I did with the thing you put in my hands 20 years ago. So you didn't fail me, Papa. You armed me. You just didn't know it yet." Her father wept and held her. Over her shoulder, his wet eyes met Nathaniel's. The 2 men looked at each other for a long moment, the farmer who had lost everything, and the rich man who had once bought his daughter like a bolt of cloth. Something passed between them that needed no words. Nathaniel descended the last of the steps and extended his hand. Clara's father took it. "I owe you an apology, sir," Nathaniel said, "for the manner in which I first took your daughter into my house. I did it coldly, and I did it basely, and I'm ashamed of every word I said to her that day. I can't unmake it, but I can tell you that she is the finest person I have ever known, and that she saved my life, my name, and my whole estate. And if you'll permit it, I mean to spend whatever years I have left trying to deserve her." He paused. And I'll tell you one thing more. She got your land back through the courts. But the debt I owe her, no court could ever set a figure to. So your land came home free and clear, Mr. Whitmore. And it stays that way. And there are 100 acres more beside it in the deed, if you'll have it. And that's not charity, and it's not payment. It's a son trying desperately to thank the man who raised the woman who saved him. Clara's father looked at the deed, then at his daughter, then at the man holding out his rough hand. He did not take the 100 acres. Not that day, for pride dies hard in a farmer, and rightly so. But he took the hand, and he held it, and that was enough. It was a beginning. They were married again in the spring. Not the cold arrangement beneath a wooden arch, with the town come to gawk, which had been a contract, a purchase, a bargain struck between a desperate father and a frozen man. This time they married because they chose to, in a small church with the doors thrown open to the May air, with Delia and Amos and Mrs. Abbott in the front pews, weeping openly, with Clara's father giving her away on an arm gone strong again with honest work, with old Josiah Sweel in the back who had asked, trembling, if he might come. And Nathaniel had said, "You told the truth when it cost you everything. You've earned a seat at any joy of mine." But the wedding was not the thing Clara remembered longest. What she remembered was the night before, on the porch of the house that had finally come fully back to life. The house that now rang with the voices of restored hands and their children, that had music in it again, with 40 at the supper table, and lamps burning in every window, because a warm house wastes no light and doesn't count the cost. "You never said it again," Clara said into the dark. "You told me in the carriage that day coming back from Richmond, the thing about furniture, about my ending the silence, and I told you not to, not then, that you weren't in your right mind, that I wouldn't be a raft for a drowning man, and you said you'd say it again on solid ground when it was all finished." She turned to look at him. "It's finished, Nathaniel. The ground's as solid as it'll ever get, and you never said it again." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I've been afraid to," he admitted, which is a strange thing for a man to confess who watched his uncle hang. But there it is. "I told you once I bought you to be furniture, to fill a silence I couldn't bear, and I meant to say the true thing when it was over. But the nearer we got to over, the more I feared you'd only stayed for the fight, that you'd been fighting for your father, and that boy, and Eleonora, and Delia, and Amos, and all the frightened souls in this house, for everyone but me. You said as much yourself that first night. I'm not fighting for you, Mr. Carter, and I was afraid that when the fighting stopped, you'd look at me and see only the cold man in the carriage, and go home to your father's land, and I'd have no war left to keep you." He looked at her. "So, I didn't say it because a thing unsaid can't be refused." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "You fool," she said softly. "You dear, cold, brilliant fool of a man." She took his hand. "I told you that night I wasn't fighting for you because I didn't know you well enough yet." And that was true that first night. But that was 11 days into knowing you, Nathaniel, and it's been near a year now. And I've knelt beside you over a murdered woman's account book, and I've watched you weep for a clerk you knew one day, and I've seen you shield me with your own body from 4 armed men, and I've watched you offer my broken father your hand, and 100 acres, and call it a debt you owed. She turned his hand over in both of hers. "You want to know when I stopped fighting only for everyone else and started fighting for you too? It was the honeysuckle. That first day I put a jar of it by your supper because I felt sorry for a house so silent, and you shoved it to the corner of the desk where you wouldn't have to look at it. And then, when you thought no one saw, you pulled it back into the light. I saw you do it through the study door before I went up. A man who tries that hard to stay frozen and can't quite manage it over a jar of wild flowers." Her voice caught. "That's a man worth thawing, Nathaniel Carter. I decided it that very first night. I just wasn't fool enough to tell you before you'd earned it." Nathaniel looked at her in the dark, and Clara watched the last of the fear go out of him. The fear that had outlived the grief, that had outlived even the ice, the deepest and most stubborn of all his frozen places, the one that whispered, "A man like him could only ever be tolerated, never chosen." "Clara Whitmore," he said, and his voice was not cold, and it was not stone, and it had not one shred of the man from the carriage left in it. I bought you to fill a silence, and instead you ended it. I told you never to speak, and it turned out your voice was the only thing that ever saved me. I said love was ownership, and I was wrong. And love was betrayal, and I was wrong. And love only ever brought pain, and I was wrong about that too. Most of all about that. I know now what love is. It's a farm girl with 2 hairpins and a ledger, and more courage than any man I ever met, who walked into my dead house and refused, day after day, to let me stay dead in it. He drew her hands to his chest, over the heart she'd cracked open and thawed, and finally fully brought back to life. I love you not because you saved my land or my name or my life, though you did all 3. I love you because you looked at the coldest, lowest, most ruined man in Virginia, and you decided he was worth thawing. And then you did it, not with sweetness, not with scraps, but with the truth, every day, whether I wanted to hear it or not. There's the thing I promised to say again on solid ground. I love you, Clara. I have loved you since the honeysuckle. I'll love you till they put me in the ground. And I hope to God that's 50 years from now, with a house full of the children and the charity my uncle murdered a woman to prevent. And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune, and buried her fear, and cracked a frozen heart, and hanged a monster, and brought her father home, and gotten back every acre the cruel had stolen, looked at the man who had once told her never to speak unless spoken to, and found she had, at long last, nothing clever left to say. Only the truest thing, the plainest thing, the thing underneath all the rest. I love you too, you cold, thawed fool, she said. Now kiss me like you mean it this time. You skipped it at the first wedding, and I've been waiting near a year to be cross with you about it. And he did. And it was nothing at all like a contract, and nothing at all like a bargain, and nothing at all like the cold nod he'd given her beneath a wooden arch a lifetime ago, while a cruel town whispered that he'd bought her. Years later, the people of that valley would tell the story of Nathaniel and Clara Carter, not as the tale of a rich man who purchased a poor bride to save his name, though that was how it began, but as the tale of the farm girl who counted, who walked into a dying house full of frightened people, and a frozen man, and a 5-year lie, and who, armed with nothing but a ledger and her father's teaching, and a courage that would not quit, brought a murderer to the rope, brought a broken doctor to the truth, brought a ruined old farmer home to his land, and brought the coldest heart in Virginia back to life, one honest word at a time. They would tell how the great pale house, that had been a grave, became the warmest home in 3 counties. Its windows always lit, its table always full, its hands always paid fair and freed of debt, its doors thrown open to every soul that William Carter's kind had ever ground down. And they would tell how the master of it, a man once made of stone, was known in his later years as the kindest gentleman in the valley, and how whenever a stranger marveled that such a warm man could ever have been called cold, he would only smile and glance at the gray-haired woman beside him, and say that he'd been frozen solid once, dead and buried in his own house, until a farmer's daughter he'd wronged looked past every cruel thing he'd done and decided, against all sense, that he was worth the thawing. Because in the end, that was the whole of it, and the truest thing either of them ever knew, that the person the world swore would ruin your life can turn out to be the very one who teaches you, at last, how to live it, and that a heart frozen a lifetime can still be brought back whole, if only someone is brave enough, and stubborn enough, and kind enough to refuse to let it stay dead. And Clara Carter was all 3. She always had been. The world had simply never bothered to.